I love Doom, and I love Doom Eternal, but I don't like The Ancient Gods Part 2, and I just want to explain why in more constructive words than just it's too easy. There's a lot we need to go through, and there's a lot of context that I think needs to be addressed, so be prepared for a long ride. Before we start though, I want to address the fact that yes, this video is quite different from the rest of my content. I can't say for sure that I will or won't be making more videos like this one in the future, but my primary focus is and always will be animation. I'm unfortunately not as active as I once was in the early Source Filmmaker days, and the reason for that is that I've been working with Gears for Breakfast since 2014. I worked a lot on a hat in time, and I was able to direct the animation and cinematics for the second DLC of the game. Creating animated shorts is still a big passion of mine, and I'll always be creating art, even if it is at my own slow pace. I hope that everyone who just subscribed for SFM animation can respect that. With that out of the way, let's talk Doom. For context, id Software has recently released their second DLC for Doom Eternal named The Ancient Gods Part 2, which I'll be referring to as Tag 2 in most of this video. And the DLC that came before it, The Ancient Gods Part 1, Tag 1. Tag 2 released to some criticism and controversy from the Doom community, but the conversation around it has primarily been focused on just the difficulty. There's a lot of factors that contribute to the difficulty in Doom, a lot of vital context that I think is missing from the current conversation, and that's why I'm making this video. After all, Doom is not hard just for the sake of being hard. But video game difficulty is a very complex and subjective topic. I've tried my best, but I can't say that I've been able to do it perfectly. There are a lot of complicated personal factors that relate to difficulty in video games, and I don't think I'm the most qualified to talk about it. Really, I'm just here to talk about Doom, because I think I at least know what I'm talking about in regards to Doom. Of course, I can't speak for every Doom fan, but I have played a lot of Doom. Before we really get into it, I think we need to go over a couple of things first. First off, I will be spoiling a lot of The Ancient Gods Part 2, and obviously if you haven't played Doom Eternal yet or The Ancient Gods Part 1, then I do highly recommend you do. I recommend you play all of it and form your own opinions before hearing mine. A lot of people, inexperienced and not, have managed to enjoy the second DLC regardless of the very real problems that I think it has, and I don't want to take that away from someone who might enjoy it despite what some nerd on the internet thinks of it. You might love it. Plenty of people did. But I didn't, and I just want to explain why. I'll only be talking about the gameplay and mechanic stuff, and not so much about the story or the final boss too much. I do have plenty of critical things to say for both, but really story nor bosses have ever been Doom's strong suit or its core focus, so that's not really my area of focus here either. Secondly, the game director of Doom Eternal, Hugo Martin, has already talked about potential changes to Tag 2's encounters and enemies, and even plans to revert some of the nerfs that I'm also going to talk about. So depending on when you watch this video, things may have already been changed. Hell, things may have been changed by the time I upload this video. Even still, I'm going to talk about everything regarding the state the game is in currently as of writing after the initial release of Tag 2. If some of my problems discussed here are fixed by the time you're watching this, awesome. But I still think it's very important to discuss this stuff so we can all be on the same page and hopefully avoid some of the mistakes in the future. Thirdly, I am pretty good at the game, so you can take whatever I say in terms of difficulty with a grain of salt if you wish. I'm not perfect at the game, and I try not to build the muscle memory for those insane weapon swapping DPS combos, because I think the game is more fun if you play stupid and reckless sometimes. Honestly, more than just playing well, I just like to play this game like a music video almost. I seriously would call this game a rhythm shooter because it really can be sometimes. Movement is my favorite thing in any game, no matter the genre, and Doom Eternal has excellent movement. The meat hook is probably the best tool in any game to reposition yourself in the middle of combat, but it's also one of the funnest movement abilities I've seen in any shooter. My favorite thing to do in this game is swing myself around arenas and bunny hop to preserve momentum and turn this game into something like a thrilling Quake deathmatch experience. Despite all of my movement techniques, I also want to emphasize that none of what I'm doing is particularly difficult to do, and I would love to encourage everyone to give these techniques a try next time you play the game. I'm not an elitist by any means. I think that'll be apparent when you listen to what I have to say. Doom is a game for everyone, but Doom is and always has been a movement shooter, and I do think it's a shame that so many people sleep on Doom Eternal's movement tech. It's greatly increased my enjoyment with the game, and it's revealed an incredible amount of depth to me. If you were maybe one of those people who originally thought this was a very grounded or restrictive game, then I highly recommend you experiment with the movement a little more next time. I wish I could help everyone reach my level of enjoyment with the game, because it truly is something else. Fourth, I'll be talking a lot about the challenge of the game, and when I want to make an argument about difficulty, I'll usually be playing on a base controller. Since id balances the game with a base controller in mind, I think it's only fair for me to play like that to make my points. I'll try to identify in the footage when I'm playing with a controller using this icon in the top left corner. I don't usually play shooters with a controller, but Doom is surprisingly comfortable. Here are my bindings and controller settings if anyone is curious.
Above a black belt, there is a red belt, and that red belt is old people playing on inverted controllers.
I think the only change I would recommend for anyone is to put jump on a button that doesn't require you to take your thumb off of the right stick, because jumping and aiming at the same time is vital in this game, and I think it'll help a lot if you're struggling on a controller. Next, mods will be used throughout this footage, and there may be some gameplay affecting mods in some of the filler footage that I use. I'll try to identify any gameplay affecting mods that I'm using in the top right corner of the screen when it appears. It goes without saying, but when I start talking about the balance and the official content of the game, there will be no gameplay affecting mods used in that footage. And lastly, when I refer to classic Doom, know that I am referring to all Doom. So that means the original games, including Thy Flesh Consumed and Final Doom, Doom 64, and even Sigil. But most importantly, this also includes the vast amounts of brilliantly designed PWADs out there. And that specifically means level packs that don't change the core game too far from the game it was modded for. To be clear, this includes mods as basic as level packs that only use vanilla Doom 1 assets, to mods with levels as extravagant and lavish as, say, something like Ancient Aliens, Eviternity, Back to Saturn X, or Sunlust. Anything that is mostly just about the maps and the encounters and doesn't mess with the core gameplay save for maybe a new enemy or tweaked weapon sprite or sound effect here and there. What I am not referring to when I say classic Doom are mods that change the core game to an unrecognizable degree, like, say, Wrecker, Shrine, or something like Treasure Tech. I think it's entirely fair to include all of these amazing PWADs under the Doom umbrella, because it is undeniably Doom, just with a new coat of paint. The bar for what a Doom encounter can be has been risen to an incredible degree only thanks to these brilliant modders and map designers, and it would be unfair to pretend like the bar isn't as high as it is. And after all, Doom is Doom. And with that, let's get into it. I want to start by addressing a controversial and very important topic so that we can clear the air and possibly reach a mutual understanding, or at the very least manage to agree to disagree so that I can talk about the rest of what I want to say without having to constantly excuse myself. Doom Eternal is a game that is undoubtedly at its best when it pushes you slightly outside of your comfort zone. Hugo Martin has said this himself multiple times, and it's obvious that that is the goal of this game's core gameplay loop. The game is at its most fun when you're being pushed into playing how you normally wouldn't if you were just on autopilot. In Doom 2016, you could easily just use the super shotgun all the way through. Id set out to avoid that when designing Doom Eternal, and man have they succeeded at that. This game has an incredible amount of depth, and I think that's relatively obvious to anyone who's played it for themselves. Every weapon, every mechanic, every ability, every AI in this game has their own strengths and weaknesses. Everything has a specific purpose, a specific role to play in the gameplay loop. If something starts killing you, then there's absolutely something in your arsenal that you can use to stop it from doing so. It's quite literally a game of combat chess. It's a term that Hugo uses, and it couldn't be more accurate. And it's a term that applies to classic Doom as well. We'll talk about that slightly more in depth when I start comparing and contrasting new Doom from classic Doom. But needless to say, this is absolutely a game that is built to push and to pressure you. Whether you like it or not, that's what this game was designed to do. And up until Tag 2, I think it did a perfect job at that. I've so rarely seen an FPS deliver such a hardcore and dynamic, but entirely fair and understandable combat experience. It's honestly incredible how they were able to pull it off using the core of original Doom as a base to build on top of. But why is Doom an inherently challenging skill-based game? Why do they give me such a hard time? Why are they making me fight two barons with a spirit in them? All I want to do is pulp some meatballs. Now, the quick and easy answer is that the game wants to push you into using its systems, into engaging with that combat chess dynamic that makes this game and classic Doom so special. Real quick, while we're on the topic, I want to recommend a video by Under the Mayo, Challenge Matters. He puts what I'm trying to say a lot more eloquently, I think. If I were to talk about game difficulty in depth, I'd just end up repeating a lot of his points. Essentially, every great game is built to encourage you to engage with its many systems that developers work so hard at crafting and making sure that they're fun to engage with. It doesn't always have to be challenge that pushes you into its systems, but for a game like Doom, challenge is how they encourage you to try out new mechanics and get you one step closer to feeling like a real badass. Every step you make towards trying a new mechanic, a new weapon mod, every new interaction with a chess piece that you may not have even thought to do without being pushed into it is one step closer to the fun zone. And Doom Eternal is a game that, without a shadow of a doubt, gets more fun as you improve. There's a surprisingly high skill ceiling, so if you're into it like I am, this is a game that can keep you engaged for years to come. Now, whether or not Doom Eternal does a good job of helping really inexperienced players reach and understand the fun zone is complicated, I think. It does some things well, like having optional tutorials to try to hammer home mechanics to people who may not be paying attention, and it displays relevant information on the death screen. But I do think there's some room for improvement. There's a lot of game sense type stuff that this game never tells you, or it expects you to get by with just a basic level of understanding, even if the game itself, especially the DLCs, require a little bit more from you. Now, I'm of the opinion that a game shouldn't have to spoon feed you everything, but it seems to want to make this inherently tough and challenging game accessible for most anyone to play, and that's great. That's admirable because accessibility is very important, but I think they would just have to work on their strategy a little bit to truly accomplish this. Now, I'm getting a little ahead of myself here, but I think the execution of designing for accessibility in Tag 2 and the subsequent nerfs to certain enemies and the encounters of Tag 1 are misguided, might be a good word. The way I see it is, their methods to help boost inexperienced players up to Doom Eternal speed was by lowering the game's top speed, so those players wouldn't have as hard of a time reaching it. I want to talk about this specifically for just a second while we're on the topic of difficulty, because I have a genuine suggestion on how they could have helped those players that doesn't end up harming or diluting the experience. I've watched plenty of inexperienced and average players play Doom Eternal on streams and whatnot, and I know Id is watching way more streams than I, so they probably have way more data than I do, but this is just what I've seen. What I have noticed is that they're not all struggling at killing enemies or even large amounts of enemies. The enemy AI specifically is not where I see them struggling. They're usually able to make it through Slayer gates just fine after a couple of attempts and enough practice. Everyone is eventually able to kill barons and tyrants, and even if they don't like the enemies, they're eventually able to kill marauders and spirits just fine. When we're talking about the DLCs, where you're given every tool and every upgrade from the start, you have literally everything you could ever need to fight anything that they throw at you. I think Tag 1 was perfectly balanced around the tools that you have, and if you have a solid grasp on all of the tools, you're going to have a great time. I believe the issue with inexperienced and returning players is not the amount of enemies or the types of enemies or even the tricks that they play on you in the encounters, like tentacles hidden in fog, for example, but rather the issue is not having a complete grasp on all of the tools and mechanics before taking on these challenges. Of course, a room with a Dread Knight and 2 Cyber Mancubi are going to stop up certain players if they don't already know that the lock-on rockets instantly stagger the Dread Knight, or if they don't remember the intricacies of the Blood Punch to use on both Mancubi, and if they don't remember the many ways to falter them to safely land that punch. Of course, an encounter like this is going to be a roadblock for these players because they likely don't know any of these techniques or they haven't gotten comfortable pulling them off yet. The only thing this game does tell you is that the Blood Punch removes the armor from the Cyber Mancubi. They never give you any tips on how to get close to the Mancubi, you know what I mean? Are returning players likely to remember that you have 2 Blood Punches, 1 for each Mancubi in this room? Are they going to even remember what all of the info on the HUD means? Are they comfortable with the game enough to start DLC 1? Would they be able to comfortably jump into Final Sin for that matter? Moving a bit further in, the double Baron Spirit fight that I thought was great, one of the most memorable encounters of Tag 1. It's tough. Of course it's tough. Barons are already tough, and now they've got resistances to all of my weapons and they're fast as hell. But do players know that lock-on rockets don't have as much resistance as the other weapons? Do they know that possessed enemies have the most resistance against the shotgun and ballista, which is the most well-known combo for those players? Do they know that the microwave beam isn't only good for killing the spirit, but is also the one tool that you have that is able to stop possessed enemies? Do the tutorial pop-ups ever tell you these things? No. Are returning players after months likely to even figure these things out, let alone be comfortable enough to attempt them in the middle of combat? Probably not. Do I think these inexperienced players would have nearly as hard of a time with these encounters if they did know these strategies and were comfortable enough to try them? And would they struggle so much against enemies like possessed barons if they were confident and fluent in their evasion techniques and platforming? I honestly don't think they would. When id released Tag 2, they drastically altered both of these encounters. The Dread Knight and the Cyber Mancubi were both removed, and the double Baron Spirit fight is replaced with 2 Hell Knights instead, and now the Spirit spawns in an Imp. The Spirit spawning in an Imp is supposedly a bug, but fighting possessed Hell Knights is nowhere near the same level as fighting possessed Barons. They're very different kinds of encounters now, and I'll talk about the encounter changes more in depth in the chapter about nerfs, because I definitely have a good idea on how to tweak the Baron fight in particular, so stick around for that. But to get to my point, their attempt at making these encounters more accessible or improving the pacing of them was by removing those chess pieces. Flat out removing troublesome chess pieces in encounters is a sledgehammer fix, and I surely don't understand this need to change the pacing that was intentionally designed to be the way that it was in the first place. In my opinion, any drastic removal of chess pieces is going to be a negative change overall to encounters that were designed to play out a certain way. To borrow Hugo's race car analogy, changes like these are not actually helping these players get comfortable with driving the race car at top speed around corners, but instead are altering the racetrack by softening or removing those corners, which affects the race for everyone. I think changes like those are changes that harm the experience for everyone, rather than addressing the other reasons that some players struggle and get frustrated. And now maybe harm is too strong of a word, because they're ultimately 2 minor encounters out of the entire maps, right? Well, when you make so many of these changes throughout the maps and even use this method of balancing in Tag 2, then it adds up. What I believe that inexperienced players struggle with, and the source of their exhaustion with difficult segments, is just their difficulty with game sense and adjusting to the controls and toolset. For obvious reasons, competitive FPS veterans are usually the ones who adapt the easiest and don't become frustrated nearly as often, even if they're dying over and over, because they're naturally already comfortable with the very basics of the game. And I mean the most basic things, like moving and shooting at the same time, platforming in the middle of combat, making on-the-fly decisions, knowing when to retreat, knowing when to push forward, memorizing all of your abilities that each have their own cooldowns, memorizing the types of demons in each of their attacks, memorizing the usefulness of every weapon and each of their weapon mods, having the confidence to try new strategies in the middle of combat, recognizing the strategic difference between the 2 super weapons, estimating the amount of health an enemy has left so you know when to push forward, learning the most efficient ways to get fodder to glory kill state, understanding that the chainsaw can be used as as an emergency panic button, among so many other basic little elements and strategies that you have to keep in mind constantly with this game. Doom Eternal is a very complex action game, and I think the base campaign does a great job encouraging and helping these inexperienced players understand the mechanics while keeping up with the vast amounts of demons that the game is constantly throwing at you. But for the people who stopped playing after the game released and then picking it back up for the DLC, those people are understandably not going to remember all of these complex mechanics, especially keeping track of the entire arsenal, which they may not have even unlocked or had time to get used to by the time they finished Final Sin. I believe that a better way to balance the experience for those types of players, to go back to the race car analogy, is to help them catch back up to speed on how to drive this race car with a detailed and explanatory crash course and driver's ed test, rather than flat out reducing the race car's top speed or simplifying the racetrack in any way. Now, I know this is the biggest example of easier said than done. It's not an easy task to teach players who can't figure out how to move and shoot, how to move and shoot. Trust me, I'm aware of how difficult it is to teach what should be basic knowledge, but from what I've seen, basic game sense and confidence in pulling off these mechanics is where inexperienced players falter the most in Doom Eternal. I'll reiterate one more time that I do not believe that removing chess pieces off of the board is the right way to balance for those types of players, nor do I think that the compromise in the name of pacing is a necessary one. The problems that I have with that method of balancing will hopefully become more apparent in the following chapters. I do have a genuine suggestion though. I was serious when I said a crash course and a driver's ed test. I think it would be at least somewhat beneficial to encourage these returning players to try out a really fun, stress-free practice campaign or some kind of endless arena where they can customize the demon spawns and give themselves supplies or health with infinite lives. Maybe there can be tiered objectives to complete, starting with basic things like kill these imps while jumping between these platforms, and ending with things like, here's 2 barons with a bunch of fodder in a tiny arena. Maybe there could be a section of the arena where there's a large tower with enemies on top, but no stairs or jump pads to get up there, and you want to encourage the player to find their own way up there with platforming or the meat hook. If a returning player doesn't go through this hypothetical training exercise and they continue to die in the DLC encounters, then they could get a tutorial pop-up encouraging them to brush up on their skills in the practice arena or something, and you could theoretically access this practice arena at any time from the main menu or through the pause menu. And of course it would load a different map, but yeah. Maybe once you first encounter an enemy or mechanic in the campaigns, it'll unlock the option to spawn those enemies or mechanics in the training arena, so people could have a chance to learn enemies like the Marauder in a comfortable environment with infinite lives. Being able to fight a Marauder in a stress-free environment might also encourage these less experienced players to actually experiment with strategies other than the SSG and Ballista. I think at least part of the reason why some players think this game forces you to play certain ways is because they're never encouraged or put in a comfortable enough position to experiment and try new strategies. So they'll just stick with what they know. And I know it's hard to get the players who need the help the most to actually play a mode that will help them. So they could further encourage players to actually complete this training exercise with a funny and unique looking skin as a reward for completion. I was thinking like a car crash test dummy skin to tie this in with all of those race car analogies. This hypothetical training arena has benefits for high level players as well. A lot of times I've wanted to try out a strategy or mess around with just one specific enemy. Usually we have to find an opportunity for that enemy to be by themselves in a level and play up to that point, and then reload checkpoints or restart the entire map to get there again. I think this training arena idea could benefit players of all skill levels. Now, of course, dev time and priority is a big factor here. Now that both DLCs have been released and DLC 2 was already hit with what I'm calling a sledgehammer, and most people who were only interested in playing through it once have likely already done so. So is this something that I think id would see value in putting high on the priority list? Understandably not. This is really a woulda, coulda, shoulda scenario. But even if it takes years for this type of thing to be built into the game, even through modding, I think it would be a very helpful addition. Maybe one day. I had more things I wanted to say about difficulty, but I ended up embellishing on those points a lot. What I've already mentioned is essentially what I think really matters in terms of difficulty, but difficulty has more factors in the enjoyment of Doom Eternal specifically, so I just want to briefly go over those other points real quick. Namely, I wanted to emphasize how important is the feeling of experiencing those scary low moments where your health gets knocked down to critical levels, and now your top priority is movement and restacking your supplies from the enemies, and then the victorious high moments of returning back to the fight and overpowering the enemy that almost killed you. How those dynamic high and low moments are integral to a great arena encounter. The best arena encounters are filled with lots of highs and lows, but I felt like not many arenas in Tag 2 managed to have too many of or even last long enough to have those scary low moments to make those victorious high moments as fulfilling as they would be otherwise. And I also wanted to mention how important the feeling of relief and satisfaction is when you complete particularly lengthy and challenging encounters that have gone through several of those dynamic high and low moments already. The feeling when you kill the last climactic wave and get that checkpoint reached message is just awesome. Give me that checkpoint reached. Yes! Holy shit.
The portal is ready. We should move immediately.
Ah, and then it's this shit. Whew, there's my adrenaline for the week. It's one of the best feelings I've ever had in any video game, so I absolutely was able to recognize when that awesome feeling of relief and satisfaction was missing throughout most of my experience with Tag 2. I think that's at least partly why it felt so underwhelming for a lot of players. Now, when I watch streamers, usually ones that haven't been playing Doom every day like I do, that feeling of beating an arena, especially the ones from Tag 1, the streamer in the chat just explode in positivity.
Oh my god, that was fucked. Fucking hell.
It's a wonderful and great feeling overall, even if there may have been minutes or maybe even hours to reach that point. The harder the struggle, the greater the satisfaction. I think that's the main point I'm trying to make here. Now in this chapter, I want to respond to certain things that Hugo has said in regards to Tag 2 and otherwise. As I've mentioned a bit already, he talks a lot about the pacing of the game, and I think I sadly disagree with him on the topic. I want to just be honest here and say that this has been the hardest part for me to write. The pacing topic is surprisingly difficult to pin down because I don't think it's something that you can look at objectively. For example, I felt like Tag 1 was excellently paced. Through and through, I thought it was perfect and needed no changes. And from start to finish, it was exactly what I was looking for in a Doom experience. But Hugo felt differently. Now, if we happen to disagree on this, I want to say right now that that's completely fine. I'm not trying to make arguments of what experience is paced better than the other. Honestly, I could care less if the pacing is what Hugo would consider terrible for a first playthrough, because I don't think that's what matters in bonus Doom content. I don't think pacing for only a first playthrough is what Doom games are about. Now hold on a moment, put those pitchforks down. I'll explain what I mean by that to the best of my ability in a minute. Forgive me if I do end up talking about any of this in an objective, right or wrong kind of way. I'm a pretty opinionated person and I realize that about myself. But I also know that a lot of this is subjective. The entire nature of experiencing and playing a video game is an extremely personal one. And while games may have some objective qualities that majorities of people can agree on, the matter of playing through it and what aspects of games you prefer can vary wildly from person to person. Some people might enjoy Doom best at the lowest difficulty, breezing through with the most powerful weapons. Some people might play Doom just for the music. Some people play Doom for the speedrunning potential. But I play Doom and Doom Eternal to be engaged with the combat chess elements of its design and to be challenged by new and interesting encounters. I think it's safe to say that Tag 2 was just intentionally designed for a different part of the Doom audience than I. Not so much for me, who enjoyed the base game, Tag 1, and experiences like the Super Gore Nest Master level level or mods that are already trying crazy new ideas. But I think they were aiming for an audience who maybe doesn't look quite as deeply into Doom as I do. That's fine, I can accept that not all Doom content is going to be aimed towards me, but you know, I actually am very concerned when Hugo says that they've gotten really good at pacing. And that's where my arguments are going to come in, and partly why I felt the need to make this video as long and as detailed as it is. If I haven't made it clear already, I do not like the new, better pacing. Now, you could say that Tag 2 is better paced, sure, whatever, but how was that achieved? How did they improve the pacing? What was sacrificed in the attempt to improve the pacing? That's what I'm focusing on in the bulk of this video. I don't want to argue what makes good or bad pacing. That's never really concerned me. What I'm concerned with is the design of Doom's encounters. And I just want to do my best to explain my position on the matter and why I feel the way that I do. I can't really do too much more than just express my opinion here. I'm not able to say if anything is good or bad. I mean, who am I to say that another artist's work is bad? Even if I do think some things objectively harm the design of the game and the experience as a whole, I have to frame my arguments as just my personal opinion. So despite my emotional connection, that's what I'm trying to do. The decisions made to service the pacing in Tag 2 and the changes made to Tag 1 were deliberate and conscious decisions, and that's why this has become so scary to me and why it's so hard to frame my arguments. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't the cause of publisher meddling, or the result of time constraints like I had originally thought when I first played it. These are decisions that id, or at least Hugo, feel are good changes for the game, but I disagree wholeheartedly with them. It's kind of made me feel like I'm spending months of my life to make an hours-long video just to tell these devs that they're wrong. I mean, who am I to say something like that? As an artist, I obviously understand what it's like when you feel like you know how you could improve your own work, and maybe not everyone agrees, but it's not going to change your mind. You're still going to want to make the improvements to the work that only your eye can see. I respect that, and I'm not expecting anything I say here to actually have an effect on the game or to change Hugo's mind or anything like that. I'm not trying to change anyone's mind. Maybe you loved Tag 2 but hated Tag 1. That's fine, I disagree, but I'm not here to tell you that you're wrong. I hope that no matter how emotional I may get talking about this game, and how much I may start talking about things in an objective, definitive sort of way, I want you to know that nothing I'm saying is meant to insult or belittle any of the work that anyone at id has made. If I haven't made it clear already, I love and respect these developers and this game. No one at id is trying to put out bad work, and I don't think any of it is bad work at all. It's a very tricky thing to be critical in a way that doesn't come off as rude or harmful. I know id Software is a pretty personal team, and Hugo obviously is very vocal and engaged with the community. Needless to say, that's given me a bit of anxiety about making this whole thing. It almost feels like Hugo has suddenly shifted gears from what I loved this game for in the first place. So now I have to try my best to explain why I think it's the wrong move in a way that doesn't hurt anybody or stir up any controversy. I don't want to create waves with this, I just want to explain why I don't like some things. Ultimately, I am a Doom nerd, and this video is written from the perspective of a Doom nerd, so that's what you're gonna hear. I've tried my best to be kind and respectful. Developers are people too. Now that I've spoken my piece, I want to continue by responding directly to a couple of things Hugo has said in interviews, videos, and streams.
I read this Steam review that I read perfectly sums it up. So the Steam, I'm summarizing, but it said, so I think I'm going to walk back my original review because I gave it a glowing review after my first playthrough. But after 3 or 4 playthroughs, I now see what the community... And I'm like, how is that fair? Like, you know, it's... I think the thing is, Tag 1 does hold up to multiple playthroughs. Tag 1 actually requires multiple playthroughs. You know, like, you have to do that shit for hours to overcome it. And that's great. Who wants the third act of their movie to be like that? It's... Tag 1 that's the second act, Empire Strikes Back, everything's challenging period. Tag 2 is that's when we're just gonna send you off and feel strong, you know.
Now, of course, I will always appreciate and respect Hugo's transparency about the development of Doom, but I'm sorry, I don't think I agree with this sentiment at all. This is another tough area to talk about because I am just one person, and a special case, I think. And by this, I don't mean to imply that the group of people like me who do play Doom regularly is a small or niche group by any means. It's a pretty large and diverse community overall, and I think you can't exist on the internet without at least in passing know about Doom or its mods. But I play Doom very regularly, almost every day actually. There's an infinite amount of enjoyment to be had about all of the games for a variety of reasons. But my counterpoint to what Hugo said here is that I don't think it's the best decision to design around just the first playthrough and to not encourage multiple playthroughs, especially for DLC content that is much shorter than the base game content. It's a disservice to the best part of Doom games in my opinion, and I think it's even going against what Doom Eternal's design is going for. Now I think maybe Hugo just misspoke here or something, because I'm sure he knows this as well. But this is a design intention behind Tag 2 that I ultimately think will hurt its legacy in the long run. I don't believe that Tag 2 will age well, and I don't think it'll be because of its initial controversy. Now, I'm not saying this just because I don't like it. I wouldn't mind eating my words on this. You all should know by now that I want Doom to succeed. I want Tag 2 to be better so that it can stand up alongside the rest of Doom Eternal. Replay value is very important. It's important for a lot of games, and especially for Doom. All of Doom. Doom Eternal tries to encourage you to learn and master its many systems that have an incredible amount of depth that I don't believe anyone can fully appreciate on one singular playthrough. I don't think it's unfair at all to hold Doom up to the scrutiny of multiple playthroughs. In fact, some of the best Doom content holds up with several playthroughs, even to this day, 24 years later. Plutonia is tough, but it's fair. Well, hold on. Fairness in Doom is something I'm specifically going to talk about in a bit. It's definitely not the best word to use when describing Doom. We'll get there. When I mean fair, I think what I mean is that it's all entirely doable. And every encounter is intentionally designed to be completable with the right strategy and good game sense. Believe it or not, challenging encounters are not trying to kill you. They're trying to push you into their fun zone. Let's talk about the first map, and hopefully it'll give you an idea of what I mean. You know, usually the first map is meant to ease you into it, right? Nothing too tough or intricate yet, usually a bunch of zombie men and imps with a structure and a pace meant to introduce you to the type of gameplay you're going to expect from the rest of the WoD. They're rarely going to make use of anything more powerful than maybe a Cacodemon or two. And there's a gradual scale up in difficulty as the levels progress that you'd come to expect from a normal game. Well, not Plutonia. Now let's analyze this encounter for a second. It's just one room, well, technically two rooms, and hopefully this can do a good enough job to sell the genius behind Plutonia, and show just how clever and intricate one basic Doom encounter can be. This is one of the first moments in the map, and it's essential if you want a fighting chance with the rest of what this map throws at you. It's these two rooms. It starts with a wide open circular room and a long hallway type room with a bunch of pillars. At the end of this strange hallway, there's a pillar with a switch that reveals a medikit. Oh, but the switch was booby-trapped. It releases revenants from each of the 4 monster closets on the sides. This is the first map, and all you have at this moment is the regular shotgun. There is a super shotgun in the room beside this one, but I always forget about it, so for now let's pretend that it's not even there. Revenants take quite a few shotgun shots to kill. You could technically whittle them down eventually with the shotgun, but it only takes 2 rockets to kill a Revenant. And there just so happens to be a rocket launcher in one of the monster closets. And there's a perfect choke point for them to funnel into to all die easily from splash damage. So that's the goal. Sounds easy enough, just quickly nab the rocket launcher and blast them when they bunch up, right? Well, one rocket launcher just gives you 3 rockets, and there are 4 Revenants. Thankfully, there's a box of rockets in the other alcoves. Getting those rockets is the challenge though, because if you stay in the hallway trap area, the intentionally placed pillars means there's a high chance that the Revenants can flank around and give you a bony fist to the face, or you might blow yourself up with a poorly placed rocket. And the longer you spend, the more time the Revenants have to stray into an inconvenient location for you or fire off homing rockets at you. And once you retreat to the circular room, you're still not safe, since now there's intentionally not enough cover to block their homing rockets. You'll have to run around in a circle to avoid them. Rockets or not, they're usually going to end up following you in there. Each one of these elements are just ingredients to this one basic encounter, and now it's up to you on how you want to cook the food. To use another one of Hugo's phrases, this is a combat puzzle, and there are a few strategies you can try to solve it. Personally, I do this in a bit of a cheesy way, but I don't think Milo Casali would care if he found out. If you're fast after pressing the switch, you can hide from the revenants and sneak in and grab the rocket launcher before waking up the whole room. And if you're agile, you can grab another box of rockets and then quickly funnel them into the choke point before they're able to corner you. This encounter, by the way, is also teaching you vital lessons that you'll need to carry into the rest of Plutonia, and lessons that help you get better at playing Doom as a whole. That lesson is that revenants hate rockets. If you play a few maps of Plutonia, or really any great megawad, you'll quickly figure out that if you see a group of revenants, you'll want to pull out the rocket launcher. It is the best way to take out a group of them without a BFG. I think revenants are best used in hordes or in tight spaces. And this is a design philosophy that carries through into Doom Eternal as well. Now, to bring this back to the topic of replay value real quick, I want you to think about how much replay value is in this one singular encounter. Maybe on your first playthrough, you were caught off guard by the booby trap and the revenants cornered you and punched the shit out of you. Maybe on the second attempt, you didn't notice the rocket launcher and just barely made it through with the shotgun and moved on. Then on the second playthrough, you set out to avoid the same mistakes and you knew what was coming this time, so you could plan accordingly. Maybe on that attempt, you did it perfectly and were able to complete the rest of the challenges with a lot more health than you had your first try. Maybe you cheese it like I do. Oh, but wait a second, then you realize you're going to want to preserve those rockets for the rest of the map. Maybe you're going to need those rockets for the Mankeybot guarding the exit, or for the cheeky Archvile up in the tower. Now you've got to go about this encounter in a completely different way to make sure that you're not wasting rockets. And now this circular room is a bit more deadly. Maybe you're like me and you always forget that there's a room right next to it that has a super shotgun, but it's too late because you've already written and recorded your analysis. And instead of using the rocket choke point, you decide to fight them in the pillar area with better odds this time. That is quite a bit of depth to just one basic encounter, and there are so many more that you could also work out and play differently with each playthrough. This is something you can master. Now, I want you to think, hypothetically, if that room instead gave you all of the rocket ammo you needed and more, no pillars in the hallway room, and instead of 4 revenants, you were fighting 2. Or maybe instead of revenants, it were just a Hell Knight and a horde of imps instead. Now, it is undoubtedly an encounter that even someone who's never played Doom can probably make it through on the first try. But what have we lost in doing so? It's a lot less interesting, right? How much do you think there is to learn or to master about this encounter? Not too much. Your brain isn't going to be lighting up too much when you come back here, and it'll eventually just become routine if you happen to revisit this map more than once. This example right here, this regrettably is how I feel about the Ancient Gods Part 2, and how I feel with id's current direction of tuning the pacing towards a singular playthrough rather than what they've done for Tag 1 and the base game of Doom Eternal. Even with the most basic incidental encounters of the base game, there was always usually something unique about them, some minor game of chess going on, something to master and ways to play differently on multiple playthroughs. Now, I know this is a bit of an unfair comparison. This is just a hypothetical, neutered version of a previously clever encounter that I just made up on the spot after all. But here's my point. Is Plutonia one of the most important and influential Doom map sets that has managed to stay relevant and fun after 24 years, well-paced or fair? Hell no. The very first map has that nasty Revenant booby trap, a chain gunner trap, and an Archvile guarding the super shotgun. An Archvile on a ledge constantly resurrecting a chain gunner in a watchtower in an area that you have to run through several times. A Revenant, a chain gunner, a pain elemental, and a Cacodemon guarding a precarious cross-shaped bridge. A Mancubus keycard trap in a small room with 2 chain gunners on each side, chain gunners emerging from walls behind you when you go to grab the blue key, and a group of Mancubi and chain gunners with a clear sightline on your only entrance into the exit room. And that was just the first map. Plutonia is not what I think Hugo would consider well-paced, but it is full of clever and engaging combat puzzles, and that's exactly why the people who love it do, and that's why it withholds the legacy that it has to this day. And I think that's why hardcore Doom fans mostly enjoyed and respected Tag 1, while Tag 2 has mostly been met with scrutiny from the very same audience. I am confident that Tag 1 could carry a legacy forever similar to Plutonia, and I was very much hoping that Tag 2 was going to continue with that and further surprise me, but it didn't. It almost feels like to me they got inches away from greatness, but then turned the other direction. It was frustrating to say the least. Apparently, Tag 2 was as challenging as Tag 1, but it was changed before release. And judging by their methods of tweaking the encounters of Tag 1 in the name of pacing, I have a feeling that the original encounters were going to be much more interesting and engaging. During streams, Hugo has casually mentioned what some of the pre-release encounters were, and to me, they usually sound a lot more interesting and fun than what we ended up getting. Dear God, I wish I could play the original version of Tag 2. Now, to take the opposite side of the argument for a second. I know a lot of people managed to enjoy Tag 2 regardless, and Hugo has learned the hard way not to change things after release. Without a doubt, changing Tag 2's encounters to the pre-release version would probably frustrate the other side of the audience. The other side of the audience who may have disagreed with everything I've just said. But I do have a minor suggestion to please both sides. I would love to have an optional choice in the menu to play an alternate Tag 2. I know it's silly and it's not really like anything else in the game and it would be a mess on the UI and all of that, but I don't think anyone would care if that's the compromise that would have to be made. And of course, this is just me being presumptuous. Maybe these encounters were changed midway through development and they haven't been able to go through those levels of polish. I don't know, I just wanted to say that I would have really liked to play the original Tag 2. That's really all I wanted to say. My other genuine suggestion is to tweak encounters based on the difficulty, which is something that the classic games did from the very start. But I think Hugo said that this is technically not possible to do with the way things are built. And that's understandable. In this game, you can change difficulty on the fly without loading checkpoints or whatever, and it would probably be very difficult and not worth the dev time to build in that functionality. So I don't actually see this ever happening, but I'm just throwing out ideas, because it could be worth it to have functionality like that. If not for future official content, then it at least could be something for modders to make use of.
Openly in the community. I just think, guys, we need pacing. Let's have good pacing so you want to play it multiple times. I don't want it to be like just exhausting, like, you know.
Okay, I have a problem with this statement too, because I think I feel the total opposite to Hugo on this. This goes back to the Plutonia encounter example, where there's a puzzle to solve which encourages different strategies for multiple playthroughs. There are some encounters throughout Tag 2 that I feel were meant to be those pace breakers, or white belt encounters that Hugo calls them, like the Pinky and Imp ambush with the blood punch charges and explosives. I'll talk more about this one in detail later, but my point for now is that once you've played an encounter like this, there's not much left to explore with it. Once you find a good strategy for encounters like this, you're probably just going to do it the same way every time, or slight variations of the same strategy. Or now it's just up to you to purposefully play worse to give yourself an extra challenge, which honestly reminds me of how I had to play Doom 2016. It's those times where I just shut my brain off and try to get it over with as fast as I can so I can get on with the rest of the level. When I reach this one Hell Knight, I just kill him and move on. When I reach this awesome outdoor area with one single Mancubus, every single time I come here, I just kill the Mancubus and move on. Every time I reach this one Pain Elemental, I just kill him and move on. Actually, I've started skipping these encounters because I don't think they're worth it. Those moments are not fun for me to replay. Isn't this worse? Aren't encounters that just hand the solution to you bad for replay value? Because it is to me. And Tag 2 is full of these moments back to back, and they're not fun for me to revisit. Now let's discuss these two encounters in Tag 1 at the end of the Holt. These encounters look pretty similar to the encounters in Tag 2, right? They're pretty gimmicky, and they're coming immediately after a difficult fight as a way to give you a breather. Much like the encounters in Tag 2, these are pace breakers. If you think of Doom encounters like puzzles to solve, then these two encounters are giving you the answer to the puzzle. Obviously, you need to use the blood punch for the Pinky room, and obviously you need to use the plasma gun for the shield soldier room. There's nothing left to solve for these encounters either, but these encounters, unlike the similar ones of Tag 2, are still fun to play. Why? It's because these encounters, these puzzles, are not at all trivialized by knowing how to solve them. If you've played this, then you ought to know that these encounters are not easy by any means. You still have to work to complete them. This Pinky room throws a lot of Pinkies at you, and even two Cyber Mancubi on opposite ends. And this Plasma room not only throws a ton of shield soldiers at you, but also a Doom Hunter. So knowing how to solve these encounters and getting the tools to solve them was only half the battle. Compare that with the similarly gimmicky encounters of Tag 2. Not only are they giving you the answer on how to solve these puzzles and giving you the tool to accomplish it, but it takes relatively little effort to pull it off. You don't have to work to solve these. Sure, these Pinkies in the hallway might get a cheap shot on you, but they are inarguably easier and shorter than the gimmick encounters of the Holt. Now just for a moment, I want you to think of Doom encounters like a scale. On one end you have effort, so this can be represented by the amount of enemies, or how many super heavies are used, etc. Basically, how easy or difficult an encounter is. And on the other hand, you have strategy, so this can be the puzzle element. What tools can you use to give yourself the upper hand? How can I use the environment to help me, etc. These encounters in the Holt give you the answer, so there's no strategy left for you to figure out. You don't have to think about how to complete these, but they balance it out by making you work for it. There's a certain amount of effort that you have to put in to succeed. Take a look at these two encounters that are back to back in Reclaimed Earth, and also that Pinky hallway in the World Spear. This encounter is giving you the answer. Obviously, you gotta use the hammer. So you do, and you wipe the room with very little effort. All you need to do is sit in the center and press a single button, and then finish off the Mancubi at the end. In the encounter that immediately follows it, you see a Mancubus at the end of the hall, and oh, some cue balls. The answer to this puzzle is right in front of your face, but it takes zero effort to solve it. It only takes a single bullet, a single mouse click to succeed. This Pinky hallway is a little less brain dead, but it's still very simple. There isn't much effort required here either. So these encounters are not only removing the thought involved in how to solve them, but are also removing the work involved to pull them off. That's the difference that I see. That's why these encounters in the Holt are still fun after multiple replays, but these encounters in Tag 2 have already gotten stale after the second time for me. Another thing about these pace breaker moments, I'll call them, is it just feels like the room is going to waste. Like, there are a lot of cool rooms throughout Tag 2 where I feel would be a great opportunity to do something more interesting than a single Mancubus. Or encounters like the Pinky ambush that just gives the solution to you. And I have to say, it doesn't have to be ball-bustingly hard or even difficult at all. Just give me a little more spice, you know? Spawn an extra enemy behind me, or actually try to push me into a part of the room that otherwise has no use other than to hold some ammo pickups or something. It's just such a shame to me. It doesn't feel like a nice breather or a pace breaker to me. It just feels like a waste of my time. I think those encounters are just boring no matter your skill level. There's pacing, and then there's wasted potential. I think you can accomplish what Hugo means by pacing with just a simple challenge, a simple combat puzzle that doesn't have to be hard or punishing, just something interesting that has multiple strategies and multiple outcomes depending on your approach. How many approaches do you think one Hell Knight has? Not too many. Now, I don't know if anyone agrees with me on that, but that's how I feel, and that's how I felt about Tag 2 as a whole.
That, like, I don't think that every single moment should be like that. Listen, if I get outvoted, this content is for you guys. So I'm asking all the black belts out there, if you want every second to be crazy, we can do that. It's not hard. I just don't think it's good pacing. Honestly, I don't think it makes for a satisfying, rewarding experience. In particular, what I don't like is something that you want to play again and again and again. Like, when I finished the Super Garnus Master level, I don't know that I wanted to play it again. Like, you know, that's not a good sign. Like, you know, I think our earlier Master levels, I wanted to play them all the time. They were really fun.
And the Super Gorness Master level, I've replayed probably more than any of the other maps in the entire game. That one level had a lot of content to keep me satisfied for a while, and that's why I look at Super Gorness Master levels so fondly. Even after I finished all of the challenges, I've replayed it over and over because it's exactly the kind of Doom experience I was looking for. A map that's always throwing clever encounters that can be approached in 1,000 different ways. I never had that experience with the other Master levels. I played those like once or twice and I was like, I'm done. So in this way, I had the opposite experience to Hugo. So it was kind of sad to hear him feel so differently about it. And my one final argument I want to make towards bad pacing is that, honestly, what's so bad about it? I don't think it's the game's fault that a frustrated player doesn't know their own limits. It's not like these frustrated players who got exhausted playing Tag 1 are playing on Ultra Nightmare for their first playthrough. You can always take breaks, and that's okay. I do it all of the time. The Doom exhaustion is definitely real. I'm not saying that I never get exhausted. I often need to take a couple of minutes to breathe after an extremely challenging encounter. But I don't see that as a negative at all, because it's an experience that I don't get to have with nearly any other game. It's a positive feeling, not a negative one. Doom Eternal is a mentally taxing amazing action game, and that's okay. You should be expecting to be mentally taxed when you play this game, and allow yourself to take as many breaks as you need. Doom Eternal is extremely forgiving with checkpoints, and classic Doom has always had save states. In my opinion, Doom games are meant to be experienced at your own pace. When you finish an encounter or clear out a room, you now have space to breathe. Space to go explore, look for secrets, restock ammo, just chill out for a little bit, and then you go on to the next room with the next encounter. And during those moments is when the map can start playing minor tricks on you. In the case of Doom Eternal, those in-between moments are the perfect place to play some cheeky tentacles. And the more engaging the encounters are, and the tougher the entire experience is, the more content there is overall to your post-launch content that people wait months to play. I think there's more value in getting many hours worth of gameplay in a single map than there is having very little resistance or engagement throughout the entirety of the DLC. When I first beat UAC Atlantica, I was like, wow, that was only the first map. There's so much to this DLC, I can't wait to see the rest. And sure enough, the rest of the maps delivered and kept surpassing my expectations up until the very end. And I've ended up playing them so many times over and they're still fun. Now that's what I call getting my money's worth. But when I beat the World Spear, my feeling was more like, oh, well, that was okay. I hope the other maps are more substantial. Only for me to realize that the World Spear was probably the most engaging and the longest out of the three. And only after a couple of playthroughs, I'm already extremely bored by the second half of Reclaimed Earth and Amora as a whole. I think id should continue to have the confidence in their own design to not take the fault of these exhausted players and to not make attempts to rectify that in a way that harms the overall experience. Now, I may be getting ahead of myself here again. There's still a lot I have to say about Tag 2, but there's still a little bit more context I want to go over before we get there. Before I can really justify what I want to say about Tag 2, I think we should brush up on what makes a truly good encounter, what makes Doom, Doom, and how you translate classic Doom encounter design concepts into Doom Eternal to make a great Doom Eternal encounter. To me, encounters and exploration have always been the core of Doom. If you have bad encounters with little exploration, then I think you have a bad Doom game. You may say, well, it's not fair to hold Doom Eternal to the same standards as classic Doom since they're so different. But I completely disagree. I think Doom Eternal has the potential to be the greatest Doom game, and I really want to try to hammer home why I think new and classic Doom are more alike than you may have originally thought. I've actually been waiting for someone to make a video about how much DNA of classic Doom truly is in Doom Eternal, but I don't believe I've seen one yet, so fuck it, I'm gonna talk about this myself. I've been wanting to talk about this for a while, and I don't think Doom Eternal gets enough credit for it. I respect it a lot though. Now, I don't mean superficial similarities like the health kits and ammo pickups look the same, or the enemy designs are the same. I think that stuff is awesome, but the similarities go much deeper. Like how resource management, enemy prioritization, positioning, and movement are the four main components to mastering either Doom game, and how watching enemy animations and memorizing their attack patterns is key to avoiding any attack no matter how frantic an encounter becomes, or how running around the outer edges of arenas in a big circle is an effective strategy in almost any encounter, or how the chainsaw's original purpose as a last resort weapon for when you run out of ammo has evolved into a weapon that gives you ammo when you run out, and is still effective as a last resort in emergencies where you can't easily get a glory kill. And how in the rare moments when you can't rely on the chainsaw, or when playing with the famine mode cheat code, you have to strategically ration the pickups placed around the rooms in exactly the same way. What about how rapid hit stun locking has evolved into an in-depth faltering mechanic? Or how most of the returning enemies share the same health pools, and how knowledge of an enemy's health and behavior in one game can transfer into knowledge and experience for the other. Or how Doom Eternal's level structure usually mirrors high-quality encounter-based maps where incidental encounters string together more substantial room or arena-based encounters. And how the Super Gore Nest is practically a modern rendition of a really good exploration map with its 3-keyed gate and a central hub location, and how the entire map opens up to you by the end with the use of those keys. There are so many more of these subtle mechanic and design similarities, and they add up to really make classic Doom and Doom Eternal feel one and the same sometimes. I still have moments where I play classic Doom and I'm like, hey, that was kind of like Doom Eternal, and times when I play Doom Eternal and I'm like, wow, that felt like classic Doom. Now, Infighting is a pretty big difference between the two, and unfortunately I do think it limits the scope of how creative Doom Eternal's encounters could theoretically play out if it were still a major mechanic. It lowers the creativity ceiling a little bit, I think. I would love to see a mod someday that makes infighting in Doom Eternal behave a bit more like it does in classic Doom, and to see what kind of creative encounters that could be made with that system. Infighting is surely different, but I think the biggest key difference between traditional Doom games and Doom Eternal is the ability to get all of your necessary resources directly from enemies. So many have already covered why this is absolutely brilliant design for an FPS game when 2016 released, so I don't need to reiterate how great it is, but that one design philosophy has the largest impact on how these games are played. This no doubt has an effect on how the demons work, how the maps are structured, how combat is structured, etc. Combat is a little less dependent on any individual enemy, as you could theoretically drop a bunch of random enemies into an arena and you're probably going to have a fun time killing them because the combat loop itself is so fun. But we both know there's a lot more to it than that. Each arena in Doom Eternal is orchestrated. Demons are never, or at least should never, be chosen at random in an authored map. If you've played Prota's randomizer mod, you can kind of feel the difference between an authored encounter and one that just picks heavy demons at random. Of course, you can get some awesome games of chess by chance, but it's still not quite the same. The best arena fights in Eternal are structured, like a song almost, where fights usually have an introduction, sections that flow into the next with intention, and a climax. Assisted by the brilliantly designed combat loop that naturally creates peaks and valleys throughout the fight, those scary lows and those triumphant highs that I mentioned earlier. Conversely, in classic Doom, an encounter usually consists of whatever demon is placed in a given room and where, and then the fight usually plays out based on the design intentions of the mapper, and the player can approach any encounter with a unique strategy per encounter. The supplies and the amount of ammo the player has a much larger impact on the resulting combat. Obviously, classic Doom mappers have a ton of clever tricks to use, like delayed enemy teleports, line def traps, time doors, and so many more creative things depending on the source port. There are even some maps that actually manage to create similar encounters to Doom Eternal's wave-based arenas. Point is, despite having such different gameplay loops, they manage to be very similar in a lot of other ways. In Doom Eternal, each demon is able to influence the song or combat dance of arena fights in their own special way. Some demons on their own are able to add just a little bit of spice to the main dish, like a Doom Hunter or a Tyrant, while some demons can take full control over the song and dance, like a Marauder or an Archvile. Most of the demons aren't able to influence the dance too much on their own, but any type of demon can have a drastic effect on the dance when used in the right amount or combined with another demon. Just like how any one demon in Classic Doom can have a dramatic difference in how an encounter plays out. And these roles that the demons, the chess pieces, play are largely identical between the two types of Doom. Most of the returning enemies have very similar behavior to their original counterparts and end up filling the exact same roles that they do in Classic Doom, like Cacodemons, and their purpose of being aerial pressure units that are constantly closing the distance on you no matter where you go. The closer they are, the higher up on the priority list they are. Or Mancubi with their dual projectiles that are dangerous at any range. Mancubi are always best used in hallways or other tight areas where you have limited space or cover to avoid their projectiles. And in any environment, they provide excellent covering fire for enemies higher up on your priority list. Arachnotrons and their constant plasma fire are there to force you to keep you on the move or to find cover. Even when taking out their turret in Eternal, their grenade attack is encouraging you to move from your position. Pinky Demons and Spectres are always trying to get right up in your face. They can become an annoying obstacle between you and another enemy that you're trying to focus on, and they can easily corner you in larger groups. And whether this is intentional or not, their natural weakness to the Blood Punch mirrors how the Berserk pack is the most efficient way of killing them in Classic Doom. Spectres serve a similar purpose, but are tougher to spot when placed in the right area, like in darkness or fog, or as we'll find out in Tag 2, snow. They're often used in conjunction with something more dangerous that requires your immediate attention, so that they can sneak up on you and ruin your day. We'll get there when we get there, but these guys are used pretty well in Tag 2. Revenants are glass cannons. They have low health and aren't a huge threat in small numbers, but a horde of them can result in a mess of rockets or a bony fist to the face if you run into them. They definitely aren't as dangerous as they used to be in Classic Doom, but their effectiveness in larger numbers and claustrophobic rooms and higher ground is something that carries over quite well. Hell Knights and Barons have become a little different from their originals, but they end up serving similar purposes. They're aggressive and somewhat tanky enemies that become meat shields between you and the rest of the demons. demons. In Doom Eternal, Barons are large enough to really block you at the worst moment, and Hell Knights are usually going to be the ones charging at you ahead of anybody else. There are a couple exceptions though, namely the Pain Elemental, Lost Souls, and the Archvile. The Pain Elemental has changed a lot, mostly because the Lost Souls have changed a lot. Now the Archvile though, I want to talk about a little bit more in depth, because despite their obvious differences, he's surprisingly able to influence the pace of an encounter in much the same way between both Dooms. In Doom Eternal, these guys usually spawn in secretly, and will occasionally start summoning in a group of buffed heavy demons, and you have a window of time to stop him from making your life miserable. And occasionally, he'll try to keep getting spawns off constantly, so you've either got to kill him quick or deal with a much larger encounter. He tends to teleport all over the place, so if you lose sight of him, you can end up hunting for him multiple times. In Classic Doom, Archies are extremely fast roamers, and they'll resurrect enemies from the corpses that lay on the ground. This results in a race to kill them as fast as possible before they res the entire room you just wiped out. Notice how in both games, it's a race to stop them as soon as possible. The main thing I think that sets them apart, however, is how they attack you. Everyone who's played Doom 2 knows that these guys are dangerous. If you see that annoying fire sprite in front of your face, your first priority is to break line of sight with the Archvile, or else he'll hit you with an extremely powerful hit scan zap attack that launches you into the air. This is a crazy powerful move, and I understand why it didn't translate into Doom Eternal. They do have an attack where they light the ground beneath you on fire.
But now it is. Because we've created hell.
He's burning the ground where I am. This is hilarious.
Oh my god, that's awesome.
Look, he's still there.
Oh my god, you gotta get the hell out of here. We gotta get into that Slayer gate. We gotta get safe into the Slayer gate. I never thought I'd say that.
That attack can hit you anywhere on the map, so I think it's meant to be similar, but it doesn't do nearly as much damage and it takes no effort to avoid it. His other attack when you get close to him though, oh man, his triple fire throw attack can really hurt, and he does a good job of leading his shots. The other big difference between them is their health pool. Original Archviles only have a little bit more health than a Mancubus, so it's totally possible to duel him with the super shotgun. In Doom Eternal though, this guy has a bit more health, and it's dangerous to stay close to him. I think Archviles are by far the most cleverly used enemies throughout all of Classic Doom. They're a surprisingly deep enemy with a lot of evil uses. Just to name a few, sometimes mappers will secretly reveal an Archvile in a previous room after you've pressed a switch or grabbed an item elsewhere, only for you to find that most of the room has been revived and now you have to deal with an Archvile on top of it. There's this part in Ancient Aliens where you're literally locked into a boxing match with some other demons, namely a Revenant, and there's an Archvile overlooking the arena, so you'll have to fight to maintain cover from him. There's the infamous Archvile maze from Plutonia. Oh, and speaking of Plutonia, look, it's a Doom Eternal Archie. Seriously, this would go on for a long time if I listed off every cleverly placed Archvile I've encountered. Doom Eternal's Archviles, on the other hand, I found to be a mixed bag. They're pretty well placed throughout Tag 1, but by far the best placements of Archviles are in the Super Gornest Master level. This guy that spawns in a difficult to reach area guarded by Revenants overlooking the ledge to get up there, spawning only after you've killed the Cybermancubi who usually stay on the lowest level. This guy is probably the most well-placed Archvile in all of Doom Eternal. And then the triple archviles at the end of the map. They're usually spread to opposite ends of the giant open arena, which makes getting to them easier said than done, and you usually won't be able to stop all 3 of them from spawning something at least once. Archviles are a bitch to fight, but you know what? They were bitches to fight in Classic Doom as well, and that's why I love them. They're one enemy that I love to hate. I won't be talking much about the Marauder in this video, but I feel similarly about him. He's an enemy that completely changes the pace of an encounter, much like the Archvile, and likewise, he's a bitch to fight, and I love to hate him too. The Marauder is to Doom Eternal as the Archvile is to Doom 2. The similarities between demons don't end here, but I think you get the idea. And to a certain extent, I think if you placed enemies like the Whiplash or the Carcass or even the Tentacles and Cue Balls into Classic Doom, I think they would work well. Hell, Prowlers are almost the Nightmare Imps from Doom 64. Now, how do we use these enemies effectively? How do we combine these chess pieces to create a unique encounter? Where do we place them? I've never created Doom maps myself. In fact, I've only just opened up Doom Builder for the first time to create that hypothetical Plutonia encounter from earlier, so you can take what I say with a grain of salt. But I have played a lot, and I usually am able to identify the intention behind certain encounters if there is something clever going on. I think the best way for me to explain this is to provide some great examples of well-designed encounters that I've been able to find recently, and why they're built the way they are. I've recently been playing through the Sunlust and Valiant Megawads for the first time, so those two are fresh in my mind. I think the most important factor with Classic Doom placement is the environment. Let's go back to the Plutonia Revenant encounter real quick as an example. I've already listed how the tight area with pillars and the large open circular rooms are both beneficial for the Revenant. I mentioned I've been playing Valiant, and I just so happened to find this very similar room that shares a lot of similar aspects. The main difference here is that they give you the plasma gun instead, which does indeed change how it plays out, but notice how the setup has a lot of shared elements. The Revenant-filled monster closets, the pillars in a tight area, and the room itself is circular in shape, with a more open area in the center. Once you know how these demons work, these chess pieces, then you can actually start taking educated guesses as to what kind of enemies you'll encounter in a certain type of room before it starts, which can be a fun little game to play. Now this is another minor encounter from one of my favorite maps from Sunlust. For context, the gimmick of this map is that every singular armor shard is booby-trapped. Anyway, there's this pit filled with a lava floor and an armor shard that you already know is booby-trapped. When you grab it, 1 Archvile and 1 Revenant spawn, and the pillar rises in the center of the room. You need to stay behind the pillar to avoid the Archvile's zap attack, and the Revenant is there to push you away from cover with his homing rocket. This is a quick and brutal encounter, but notice how it's only 2 enemies. 2 enemies, but with a lot of intention behind their placement. This is what I mean about how a singular enemy can have a dramatic effect on how an encounter plays out, because without the Revenant, this encounter would become trivial. Now when I think of Barons and Hell Knights, I can't think of an encounter that puts a spotlight on them quite as well as the end of map 16 of TNT Revolution. It starts with a megasphere that you're probably gonna need. When you grab it, it lowers you down into a diamond-shaped tight maze and lowers a wall showing you what you'll be up against. A bunch of Barons and Hell Knights sat next to teleporters that lead to the opposite ends of the maze. Once you start this encounter, a few of them will take the teleporters and are going to start closing in on you. The hallways here are too tight to squeeze by them, so if you get sandwiched by Barons at full health, you're not gonna make it. Thankfully, there's a couple shortcuts with closed doors, so if you find one, it can save you from getting sandwiched. There are some hit scanners and imps placed around the place, which maybe are supposed to get the Barons distracted, but I think they just get in your way. There's a switch that opens the exit, which also spawns in a bunch of Revenants into the maze, another enemy who thrives in a tight space. They'll also occasionally take the teleporters to give you a nasty surprise. This encounter makes clever use of Barons, Hell Knights, and Revenants, and it's thrilling in my opinion. Your spatial awareness and kiting skills need to be on point if you're going to survive this one. Oh, and there's one cheeky Hell Knight guarding the tiny exit corridor. Finally, let's talk about some great Cyberdemon use in Sigil. That's right, it's the Cyberdemon maze. This is a large room shrouded in darkness with a simple and comprehensive maze. Hit scanners and imps overlooking the maze from the top, a Baron turret and a watchtower in the center, pinkies inside the maze to get in your way, and of course, a Cyberdemon stalking around inside. In case you don't know, Cyberdemons can kill you with only 1 or 2 rockets depending on if you've gotten a full stack or not, which you won't in this map. I think it goes without saying how how deadly a Cyberdemon can be in an environment like this. There's a good chance he can sneak up on you, and to progress you'll need to do some platforming up on the top. All the while the Cyberdemon is still able to shoot you from down below. There's so many brilliant little elements that are going into this one. You've got all the enemies on top, and the Baron in the center keeping you on the move when you get to the top part. The teleporters on these platforms both serve to let you escape from the Cyberdemon's line of sight, but also teleport you right into his line of sight if you're not careful. But the structure of the platforms encourage you to keep moving quickly. There's a berserk pack at the beginning and the end of the maze to make sure that you're at full health just in case the Cyberdemon got a cheap shot on you, and to give you a quick way to deal with the pinkies that block your way inside. And there's one little thing that pushes this over the top for me. It's these ribbed walls in the maze which are purposefully placed to trip you up against the Cyberdemon if you're not careful with your movement. I am consistently impressed with Romero's encounter design. God damn, does that man know what he's doing. Now, what do all of these encounters have in common? I'll give you a second. They're all built with intention, and they are all deliberately evil. Doom is evil. Doom has always been evil. We can go all the way back to episode 1 with the very first monster closet trap that everyone mentions when they talk about this game. Or we can go back to even the first map with its deliberate use of shotgunners around corners ready to hit people who weren't as comfortable with checking around corners as much as we are today. And the imps shooting down at you from somewhere you can't immediately get to in a room with a jagged path on top of a hurt floor. I always think of the relationship between a player and a Doom map designer to be a playfully antagonistic one. The best maps are always trying to throw you off of your game, make you stumble, or just give you a really nasty surprise every now and then. And that is where the power fantasy aspect comes in. A player truly feels their power when they're taking on overwhelming odds headfirst and managing to make it through with their own skill and tactics. Without facing something tricky and deadly, then there isn't much meaning behind the power you possess, and then it becomes mindless shooting. This dynamic between an evil map designer and a power-hungry player is a very important one, I think, and it's a dynamic that has persisted well throughout most of Doom Eternal. I mean, think about how ruthless and mean maps like Cultist Base are, or Neckerval, or Taurus Nabad. And the maps of Tag 1 exemplify this dynamic very well. They were deliberately evil, and they were always trying to surprise and throw new tricks at the player. A Baron in the first area, Cyberdemons in tight hallways, Arachnotrons and turrets firing across large gaps, surprise Archviles, and the very first double Marauder encounter. Tentacles hidden in every nook and cranny at a level that tells you right off the bat to expect tentacle abuse with a giant one at the start. Multiple Dread Knights in a claustrophobic area. The double Barons with a spirit that was one hell of a memorable and iconic introduction to a very dangerous enemy. The first buffed Marauder encounter with no way to deactivate the buff. Spectres in fog, and a spectral variety of one of the most dangerous enemies. A chance to fight a Marauder and a Tyrant at the same time. The electrified pillar encounter using nothing but enemies that thrive in tight spaces. A real true Cyberdemon encounter with tentacles that once you know we're there are no longer a problem and become much needed ammo refills against an enemy that eats all of your ammo. And a final boss that takes the elements of what you've learned throughout the DLC and pits you against two spirits and bloodmakers. And while Hugo Martin unfortunately sees some of these things as trolly or things that hurt the pacing, I saw it as Doom Eternal finally coming into its own as a true Doom game. I was proud. I felt justified in my respect and admiration for the game. It'll kick your ass and spit in your face for sure, but it was very brilliantly designed on almost all fronts. And it was just the right amount of evil in my opinion. It was full of cleverly evil design decisions that I would have come to expect from some legendary polished P-Wad. I was very sad and frustrated to see them walk back on that stuff. I'm still really sad that they all of a sudden view evilness and tricks and traps as unfair, needlessly frustrating, or just trolly. I don't want Doom to be fair, and I don't think it's supposed to be. Doom is supposed to be evil. The demons are supposed to spit in my face, or else there isn't much satisfaction or motivation to rip and tear them down. Tag 2 isn't without its evil moments for sure, but I can just about count on one hand the amount of truly evil tricks, and most of them are delegated to just the first map. Oh, and also, platforming has always been a part of Doom. Shut up about it.
Or just get good.
Anyways, now that we've covered the variety of chess pieces that were brought over from classic Doom and how to cleverly combine those pieces in environments built to give them an advantage over you, now let's see how we can take those exact same concepts and translate it into Doom Eternal's unique flavor of Doom, to really drive home my point of how the methods of encounter design between new and old can be shared with one another. Now, what better way to demonstrate how those concepts of encounter design can properly translate into Doom Eternal than using an example of an encounter that shares none of the chess pieces from the original Doom games. It'll strictly be Doom Eternal exclusives for this example. We're going to the Super Gore-Nest master level for this one, and I just want to state right off the bat that yes, this is a master level, yes, it is difficult, but that in no way means that you can't take these concepts of encounter design to create easier encounters. Clever and evil encounters are not exclusively ball-bustingly hard. Now, I don't think Doom should be simplistic or a walk in the park either, but we've already gone over the difficulty topic enough, so I'm just going to stop excusing myself from here on out. Difficulty aside, the Super Gore-Nest master level is chock full of well-designed encounters that perfectly mirror the design of great classic maps. End of story. I'm gonna be running through with classic mode for this because I think this master level was designed around this specific progression of weapons that they give you, and I think they did a great job with that. And I think classic mode gives them an excellent opportunity to design more encounters around a limited arsenal to create even more unique scenarios. Classic mode makes it feel even more like Doom than I ever could have imagined, and I hope to see more of classic mode in the future. Now on to the encounter I wanted to talk about. It's the one in the Gore Pillar room that was originally a deliberately evil introduction to the buff totem in the base game. At this point, all you have is the shotgun with sticky bombs, the heavy cannon with precision bolt, and you've just been given the base rocket launcher. What they're about to throw at you might seem scary at first, but this is all you need. When you drop down, the room slowly fills with fog as the music builds up. This is a great touch, by the way. It really hypes up this fight in an awesome way. Once the fog has completely filled the room, mecha zombies and 2 spectral whiplashes spawn in as your warm-up. The demons can see you, but you can't see them, so you'll need to get used to spotting enemies and projectiles in the fog for this encounter. The mecha zombies will get you accustomed to dodging red-colored attacks in the fog, and the spectral whiplash trains your eye and makes good use of the rocket launcher's splash damage that you've just been given. These enemies also serve as a way to restock your health or ammo before the real fight. Once you kill the whiplashes, the party starts. A marauder spawns in the center of one side with 2 mecha zombies to his left and right. This is a scary situation, right? You've never had to fight a marauder without a super shotgun or ballista before. Whatever are you going to do? Well, now it's time for Doom Eternal to have the confidence in you to deal with this guy in a new way, which if you didn't know you could do before, this encounter will open your eyes to the possibilities. Before this encounter, I never really used much else to kill a marauder because I never needed to. So sure enough, this fight managed to kick my ass and teach me some new things in the process, and let me tell you, I was loving every single second of it. This encounter oozes confidence, and I was having so much fun being put into a deliberately evil situation that I had never been in before. Before the recent update that launched with Tag 2, I think the only way to stagger this marauder was with a good meat shot from the shotgun, and it can be tough to land a good shot on him since he moves so fast. The first strategy that I found to work was a shotgun to stun and follow up with a rocket. I knew you could fight the marauder in several ways already, but I just never got an excuse to try it until this moment. Anywho, one marauder in fog? Sure, it's hard to see him until he gets close, but what's so special about this? Where's the combat chess? Well, in my many first attempts at this fight, I'll tell you that it wasn't just the marauder that was throwing me off my game. It was his wolf that he was constantly spawning. That wolf in the fog is the real enemy here. Well, he only spawns the dog if he blocks one of your attacks, right? Just only attack him when he opens up for a counter. Well, that's where the magic comes in. He guards attacks from demons as well, and likewise, he'll spawn the dog after getting hit with a couple of enemy projectiles too. And guess who's constantly spawning in this arena? The good old mecha zombie who has a rapid fire plasma projectile attack with a huge spread, and they love to spray that plasma all over the place. There's the intention behind this encounter. They didn't just give you a marauder in the fog because they thought it would be hard, and they didn't just randomly place in imps, gargoyles, or zombies for this encounter either. They knew what they were doing. Hugo Martin said that the marauder's retaliation to friendly fire was an unintentional mechanic, but if it was something they were going to fix, I don't think they would have created an encounter that highlighted highlights it like this. It's very similar to how infighting in the original Doom was also unintentional behavior, but was used as an actual mechanic for encounters as early as Doom 2. So for this encounter, you have a room with several pillars, filled with fog, spectral whiplashes, a marauder, and a buttload of mecha zombies. Those are the chess pieces, and that's your game of chess. After several attempts, I finally pieced this together and I changed my strategy. Originally, I was ignoring the mecha zombies and only killing them to restock my supplies like you normally do with fodder, but once I realized what was actually going on and started targeting the mecha zombies as soon as they spawn in, this encounter has become a lot easier. It's not at all trivialized, mind you, and you can still very much complete this without focusing on the mecha zombies. That's just my one strategy to this one singular encounter. Once again, remember the Plutonia Revenant encounter example. Think of how many similar elements these two encounters share. They both take place in a disadvantageous area for you, but an advantageous one for the demons. They both make clever and intentional use of one enemy's particular mechanic and/or quirk, and they both have one solid strategy, but it is not at all the only strategy. This is great stuff, and you can find moments like this all throughout Doom Eternal's base game, and especially Tag 1 in the Super Gorness Master level. Now that's all well and good, but that's an incidental encounter, right? It's not exactly the wave-based arena encounters that are the main highlight of this game. Surely these concepts don't translate quite as well when you have to fight waves of increasingly heavier demons, right? Wrong. I'd like to run you through what might be my favorite encounter in the entirety of Doom Eternal. It's the left-hand path crescendo arena in the Blood Swamps. If you've played this arena, then I'm sure you remember this one. Everyone and their mother remembers this specific arena. You want to know why? Because it's ruthless, but not at all impossible to overcome with enough effort and a slight strategy adjustment, which I'll get to. I think this is a fantastic arena. It's easy to understand and it flows extremely well. The main central area of this arena is a wide open space with a clear view of both ends. There's this tight choke point on the left side and a flank route on the farthest edge with the cage and the armor pickup. This choke point goes down and leads into the top of the bridge, which funnels demons right into the main area. On the right side of the arena, you have this staircase choke point. It's a little weird, but I can see the brilliance in it because it provides a great escape route. Demons rarely go there on their own, and there are two ledges separating the stairs from the rest of the area, so you can run through it and delay whatever demon is chasing you because they have to waste time playing their jumping animations. And take note of that, it's important.
Write that down, write that down!
The starting side is pretty wide open and provides a very clear view of nearly every path, so at a glance you can see which way is safe and which way is not, with the exception of the staircase flank, which is usually empty during combat. And that staircase, by the way, is purposefully hidden from this view to provide a place to hide a buff totem on the first wave. On the back side, you have a high ledge with a double staircase on the left and a jump pad on the other side for quick access. There's also a monkey bar to easily get on top from the central bridge, and if you're going the other way, they can smoothly transport you to the staircase flank. This backside also provides a clear view of most of the arena at a glance. And over here, there's a ledge with a soul sphere. A full heal is just what you need sometimes in this arena specifically, and thankfully it doesn't trivialize anything like a quad damage would. There's a teleporter that takes you from the back end to the left side balcony. This balcony has a very justified BFG charge on it. Both of these teleporter entrances are somewhat covered and out of sight from the main area, which does a good job of providing safety after going through it, if only for a moment. This underpass feels spacious at first, but anyone who's played this knows it can get claustrophobic real quick. The outer edges of this arena are completely open, even in places that it doesn't look like it is. I imagine this is intentional, so you're not getting blocked by invisible walls if you need to quickly dip out to avoid an attack and jump back in. I really appreciate the lack of invisible walls because it's come in handy for me a lot. So when you first arrive, they let you take as much time as you need to get comfortable with this area and stock up if you need it. These moments to mentally prepare yourself are so great in any Doom game. Every time they give you the ability to start an encounter on your own terms, you know it's going to be a tough one. When you're ready, you stand on the box in the left corner to begin the encounter. The first wave is a horde of revenants, some prowlers, and a buff totem. Revenants and prowlers? Guess what? Rockets are very good against both of these enemies. Eventually, the second wave comes in, and now there's a couple Hell Knights on the board. And you know how rockets are good against the previous two enemies and now also the Hell Knights? Well, say hello to a large group of carcasses as backup. When you kill all the Hell Knights, 2 Tyrants come in, and now there's a second buff totem. Now here's where shit gets real, but we've only just begun. It was intentional that killing the Hell Knights progresses the encounter, but not the carcasses, so that now there's a high chance of dealing with carcasses and Tyrants at the same time, which is a deadly combination in a claustrophobic arena like this. You'll want to try to damage both Cyber Demons equally if possible, because when you kill one of them, the star of this show rears his ugly head. 2 Barons of Hell come in, and man, if this arena wasn't built for them to shine. They can chase you anywhere you go, including that tiny staircase choke point. They can very easily sandwich you in that underpass, and they take no time at all to follow you out of the teleporters. There's a decent amount of verticality in this arena though, which provides you with just enough space sometimes to get off a couple of shots while they're busy getting up or going down to your level. If you still haven't learned how to fight multiple Barons, you're going to learn here. This arena is just the right size for these enemies, I think, but there's still plenty of room to escape from 2 regular Barons. These Barons are just the test, just another warm-up, because when you kill them, a possessed Baron spawns in, and depending on which path you've taken, this could be your first experience with one. The first thing you'll notice is that possessed Barons are fast, and I mean fast. The size of this arena won't do you too much good if you wait around in any area for more than a couple seconds. And now this guy can't be faltered and he resists most of your damage. Chances are there will be at least 1 or 2 moments where you're knocked down to critical health but are still under pressure from the Baron, and that's where the Soul Sphere comes in handy. There are some very effective strategies for possessed Barons. Keeping your distance and using lock-on rockets is almost always effective. Once you've gotten him down to about half health or so, one final Baron spawns in to throw you off of your game. Just when you thought you've gotten a handle on this fight once more, here's this guy to throw one final wrench into it. Needless to say, the spirit in the first will go into the second if you're not quick enough to zap it, so it's wise to shift your focus away from the possessed one and try to kill the regular one first. This is easier said than done, since the possessed Baron you've been fighting is hounding your ass and it's difficult for the other one to catch up in time to do damage to him instead. Both of your super weapons are useful in this arena for their own reasons. The BFG is perfect for dealing equal damage to the Cyber Demons, and the Unmaker is probably the best thing you've got to quickly shred either of these Barons. But now you're in the home stretch. Once you get the Spirit, you can take the most satisfying breath of relief that you've likely had with your entire experience with this game so far. This fight is tricky, and it feels like it was meticulously designed to be just the right amount of evil. The arena is perfectly designed to accommodate for your traversal, as well as giving the demons a fair shot at catching you and cutting you off from nearly any position. The choice of a Soul Sphere instead of something more powerful like a quad damage is usually just what you need in a moment of panic. The waves and spawns themselves are cleverly laid out, and I can see deliberate intention behind each enemy. It's never too much more than is possible to manage, and every enemy used here seems to work well together. I think this arena encounter is brilliant, and if you were maybe too frustrated to enjoy it properly the first time through, I hope I've been able to show you why it's so good. And maybe you'll be inspired to give it another shot with a little more confidence next time. Personally, I love when Doom manages to kill me a couple of times. It raises the stakes, it makes me turn my brain on, and maybe it gets me to learn something new. But most importantly, I get to keep playing the game. Really, I don't think that fact is championed enough. I don't really see dying as punishment in Doom Eternal. It's one of the few games where I welcome and enjoy death, because I love this game's combat, and I often enjoy redoing fights better or in a different approach from last time. I love when the game forces me to learn something or pay attention to the purpose of an encounter. To me, death in Doom Eternal is wonderful. I usually die with a laugh, not a groan, and I don't think I'm alone in that. Anyways, so now that we finally have that context I was talking about at the start, and we've gone over how enemies and environments can be utilized in creative ways to create awesome encounters across all types of Doom, I think it's finally time to start talking about Tag 2 specifically. So I've condensed this chapter the most by far. I initially wanted to go through and analyze each enemy and encounter in Tag 2, but this video has already become extremely long, and I think I've made the points that I really wanted to make as clear as I can already. This DLC was intentionally designed to go lighter on the combat puzzles, so I think going through and spending several minutes just to explain why a single Hell Knight in a hallway is not good encounter design would be a huge waste of everyone's time. And throughout the base game, Tag 1, and the Super Gorness Master level, it has shown that they absolutely know how to design interesting and engaging encounters. So explaining why one single Hell Knight is bad design probably isn't going to change anything. So I have instead decided to spend more time on the topic of pacing and my concerns with id's sudden shift in balancing priorities. There is absolutely some good in this DLC, and I do want to highlight the parts of Tag 2 that I did like, so what I'm going to do in this chapter instead is just do a lightning round of things I liked and things I didn't like about the DLC. I'm only going to talk about the gameplay and mechanic stuff, and not so much about the music, visuals, or story. I'll say right now that I love the music in both of these DLCs, and I'm very impressed with what Levy and Hulshult have been able to bring to the table, but unfortunately some of the encounters make the use of music feel cheap to me. Like, the encounters aren't worthy of the awesome heavy fight music that plays, which is a feeling I've never experienced in this game until this DLC. Alright, let's get to it. I appreciated the inclusion of the meat hook points, but I didn't like how they were mostly just used in the World Sphere, and then they're quickly forgotten about and delegated to just platforming tools in the next two maps. Especially for Amora, where I feel those hook points would have really improved that map a lot. I really like the first couple deliberately evil encounters in the World Sphere, and the clever ways they found to use the Screecher chess pieces, but I was disappointed that the Screecher is also quickly forgotten about and then used for only two other encounters up until the very end of the DLC. I love the potential that the Armored Baron has as a chess piece that forces you to shift your priorities, but I was really disappointed that every single encounter with an Armored Baron never really took advantage of this potential, and he's never combined with another enemy that might have required you to shift your priority away from the Baron. The only exception that I can think of is at the very end of Amora in the final arena fight where he's combined with two Cyber Mancubi. Except Cyber Mancubi aren't as high priority as regular Mancubi, and I think two regular Mancubi could have created an interesting scenario where you have to juggle weak points. And speaking of this encounter, I was disappointed to find that the Spirit never goes into the Armored Baron no matter how hard I tried to get it to happen. I don't like the first arena encounter's Imp Wave that I think is meant to act as a reward for completing a challenging encounter, except they don't give you a challenging encounter to warrant that reward, so it always feels like an anticlimax instead of a fun victory lap. I don't like this one single sergeant. I don't like this encounter that only gives you 2 whiplashes when the very first introduction of the whiplash gives you 3 of them, shield guys, and explosives that can kill you at that point in the game, which is a difficult encounter right before they let you unlock the whiplash's natural counter. I like that they attempted to booby-trap this BFG charge, but I don't like that it's not at all an encounter that would warrant the use of that BFG charge as a potential risk. I don't like how this Nuked's room trap is trivialized by using lock-on rockets. And I don't like how they seem to be scared to throw more than just 2 Kakos at you at any given moment, even though you have a couple really powerful counters against them. I really like this deliberately evil sludge trap, but I didn't like the fake-out encounter that doesn't really match the power of the quad damage or the music that they use. I really love how the hammer feels to use, but I really hated how they never give you encounters strong or hectic enough to really require the use of the hammer, which really doesn't help the overall balance issue that I think this DLC has. I love the deliberately evil placement of the tyrants coming in immediately after the spirit is released here, which creates an excellent oh shit kind of moment for the player, but I didn't like how they seemingly deliberately stopped that from happening in the final arena in Reclaimed, which is an arena that is in dire need of that kind of evil spice. Maybe we could have gotten the very first possessed Archvile. I love the Stone Imps, but I was really disappointed that despite having 2 very similar encounters that use only them, they still never managed to make their presence known as a real chess piece, when I think they would have been a perfect combination with enemies like the Armored Baron. Like I said, I really hate all of these white belt encounters. I think this encounter could be immediately improved with some very minor tweaks, like removing either the barrels or the blood punch charges, or by replacing the imps with stone imps so that they better complement the pinkies and so they don't all die if you so much as breathe in this room. I love the escalation encounters and the arenas, but I really hate this invisible wall around the tree that has nearly gotten me killed several times, and I think these second encounter pop-ups should not come up if you have tutorials turned off. I didn't like how they had a tendency to only throw groups of 2 low-level demons at you at any given moment, and how arachnotrons were only ever used in groups of 2 4 separate times throughout the World Spear. I really didn't like how the World Spear ends on a really disappointing fight, and there wasn't a cool climactic fight in the World Spear itself, so that beautiful environment with all of those new art assets they made are passed by in under a minute. I like the potential drama that a Cursed Prowler can create, but I don't like that they never trust the player to be able to survive these enemies, which results in an introductory encounter that a trigger-happy player can completely miss if they have tutorials turned off. And that room in Amora, which could have been a deliberately evil standout encounter for these enemies, has instead been turned into a mindless room that you can complete by mindlessly firing the super shotgun, and how there are still very obvious leftovers from the previous Prowler encounter. And speaking of the Cursed Prowler, I don't think giving the player a free blood punch upon getting cursed is the right way to balance these enemies, because I think that element is where their potential as a chess piece truly lies. Instead, I would recommend giving the player more opportunities to catch and kill a Prowler, like maybe making him extremely sensitive to getting faltered during a curse, or giving the player a minor speed boost while cursed. I really love this first arena encounter in Reclaimed Earth, and I also adore the escalation encounters in the boxy, cramped arena that surprisingly flows extremely well and has become one of my favorite arenas in the DLC. I like the clever games of chess that they've been able to come up with, like how they combine the Cursed Prowler with an Archvile, which are 2 time-sensitive enemies that can also require you to juggle your blood punch charges, and how the specters seem to always be able to interrupt you zapping the spirit no matter where you are in the arena, which I think is a trick that works better in this tiny cramped arena than it did in the Blood Swamp's fog area. And I like that there's an opportunity for the spirit to go into a cacodemon for the first time. I both like and don't like how the hammer with full auto can make fighting marauders a brain-dead experience. On one hand, I think it's good to give the marauder a counter for inexperienced players that isn't just weapon swapping, but on the other hand, it can turn these very dangerous enemies into a joke. I mean, look at this. I like the first half of Reclaimed Earth, but I really don't like how hard this map falls off immediately after the escalation arena. How they string together 3 white belt pace-breaking encounters in a row, then there's one good cleverly evil incidental encounter, then another white belt encounter, then probably the worst arena encounter in all of Doom Eternal, followed by some extremely toothless and pointless hallways, ending with 2 revenants that jump right in front of your face, followed by the most obvious secret in the world. The double revenants is another encounter that I think could be improved with some very minor tweaks. Like, why not spawn the revenants on opposite ends of the bridge? Or spawn them behind me and put a knight in front to push me back into them? Or why not a couple cacos coming in from the opening on the side? Now, you might have cocked an eyebrow when I said that this is the worst arena encounter in the game. Now let me explain this. I'm going to just let this clip play in its entirety. I was able to complete this encounter by using only 1 weapon, staying just on the upper area without jumping at all, dashing only once to save my life, on a controller, without HUD, on Nightmare. Sometimes a Cybermancubus spawns on that ledge over there, but he doesn't really change the encounter much. He just wastes my time and my ammo. Personally, I think it's fair to say an arena encounter isn't the best if it doesn't push you into the Doom dance at all. I can't play this stupidly in the arenas from the base game, so why are they suddenly letting me get away with playing like this? I really don't like how this white belt encounter gives you a free BFG charge, but nothing in between this one and the one at the end even warrants the use of a BFG. I don't like how they completely missed the opportunity to use the purple sludge in this area to create a true standout encounter for the Riot Soldier. And generally, I really don't like this enemy at all. I think he was undertuned and misused throughout the DLC. He never gets a real standout encounter and is only ever placed in down, out-of-the-way areas in extremely small numbers, which needless to say makes it hard for his presence to be known up until the very end. For an enemy that's a spiritual successor to such a legendarily evil enemy, these guys are quite honestly pathetic, or at least they're never used in a way that helps them stand out. I kinda like the Screecher encounter, but I do think it could be spiced up just a little bit with one extra super heavy at the end or something. I like this a lot. Aww. I don't like how empty this arena feels specifically. For such a giant open arena, they sure seem to be going very light on fodder, when arenas in the base game are usually overflowing with fodder. The hammer really should be the perfect excuse to just throw insane amounts of fodder at the player, but they never do. This DLC's overall use of fodder and even heavy demons is less chaotic than incidental encounters in something like Arc Complex. I really don't like Amora. Like, at all, sorry to say. I don't have fun replaying this map, and I think it's simply toothless. Not just easy, toothless. Nearly every single incidental encounter can be skipped with minimal effort, and rooms like the previously mentioned what would have been a Prowler encounter, and this room, which I can only assume was going to be much crazier, but is instead just one single Arachnotron, a couple of inconsistently spawning Stone Imps, and ending with 2 Pain Elementals. I don't understand what kind of game of chess is meant to be happening here, and I don't understand why you would need all of these shotgun shells. And the rest of the ammo pickups here don't seem to make sense with what this encounter really is either. These are also the only escalation encounters that I really didn't like. I did like how the first encounter ends with a very clever combination of Barons, Carcasses, and Cacodemons. I think that combination works very well with this cavernous layout, but this arena in general can be trivialized by sticking to these jump pads, and I think this could be improved just by placing some Pain Elementals or Cacodemons on each wave or something. If you want to discourage a player from cheesing an encounter or an arena, then I think the best way to do that is by applying pressure in that area. The Pain Elemental's Soul Spit attack and the Cacodemon's Bite attacks would be enough to force those players to move away from the jump pads. I don't like how the only time you encounter a group of Riot Soldiers larger than 3 is an encounter that you can trivialize with a singular rocket explosion. I don't like the double Hell Knight Spirit encounter, which, like I mentioned earlier, is trivialized by the use of one weapon mod. I really don't like this white belt encounter that can be completed by standing still, and I don't like how this cool looking arena with a huge amount of real estate seems to have zero purpose. I would have loved to see some Mankibai or Revenants on those corners, or Cacos closing the distance on the arena from the outside while you're dealing with those enemies. I really don't like how the Hell Troopers, despite being intentionally designed to be Stormtrooper levels of useless fodder to mow down, are still placed around as if they were regular fodder. They seem to be used in place of actual fodder enemies, which ends up making this part of Amora feel completely empty, boring, and once again, toothless. I don't like how the final couple Armored Barons are still only being handed to you all on their own, which results in every encounter with one feeling exactly the same. I don't like how much of a missed opportunity this open area is to have turned this into a creative, cohesive arena by using the meat hook points to connect the two sides, and to spawn all of the heavy demons that are used in this area at the same time or something. Instead, you end up fighting each one of these heavy demons one at a time, which is not fun or more interesting. I don't like how they missed the opportunity to place chess pieces like the stone imps or specters on areas like this bridge to create a deliberately evil and memorable encounter. I don't like how this huge room only has 3 weak fodder enemies inside, and I don't like how empty Amora feels in general. The only time this map feels like a war is going on is when you're looking at the background, which by the way is certainly incredible. They did a good job with this stuff, but it is still ultimately just background stuff. The only time you'll actually see fodder fighting in the city portion of Amora is in this one little area that you don't even have to go to that only has 3 enemies on it. I don't like this quote-unquote secret that only has a single revenant guarding it instead of something like an archvile who could have had an opportunity to teleport into the outer area, which would then give this monkey bar a little more purpose. I don't understand the intention behind these encounters that gives you 1 single spectral whiplash, then 1 single armored baron, and then 1 single mancubus at the end. I think this area could be improved if you spawn all of these enemies together either in the top area, or maybe put the mancubus over here and let the baron and the whiplash chase the player together. Now, for a map that was apparently made to be paced similarly to Arc Complex, I have to say that it feels nothing at all like Arc Complex. Like, in Arc Complex, you can't skip nearly any of the incidental encounters, and the ones that you can aren't worth skipping because they're actually fun and engaging. Or how the very opening of the map, unlike Amora, is both encouraging you to push forward with its heavy use of fodder demons, but also making real attempts to push you back with its constant and deliberate use of heavy demons like Pinkies and Hell Knights. And Arc Complex at least knew not to ever just throw 1 single Hell Knight in hallway at you and call it an encounter. Any and every time Arc Complex gives you just 1 heavy demon, they're always either accompanied by more demons, or they're there to connect encounters together, or they're actually placed with a little more intention, like how this 1 single Kako is placed at just the right distance to get a chance to push you back into the wall. Or look at this one encounter in this tight hallway that places a mancubus at the end, a carcass to stop you from moving closer and from using the flank route on the left side, and a prowler to catch you if you retreat. Now that's the combat chess that I love. That's a creative encounter. Why isn't there anything like that in Amora? Or the fact that Arc Complex has about 6 or so substantial arena encounters that each have large amounts of heavy demons, and the incidental encounters connecting those arenas are equally relentless and are always throwing fodder or enemies like Pinkies in your way. Or they're just trying to stop you up with a couple of evil tricks like the floor falling beneath you. Seriously, if a map in the middle of the base game can throw so much at the player, why is it so much to ask for the final map of the DLCs to be at least half as deadly? Back to Amora, I don't understand this strange stone imp encounter placed at the very end. I know that it was just meant for fun, and I don't dislike it too much really, but that doesn't make it not a very bizarre and odd feeling inclusion. It just feels pretty misplaced right before a final boss. You'd expect that maybe an encounter just before a boss would try to introduce you or try to refresh you on the mechanics that you need to utilize to fight said boss. But this encounter has nothing to do with the boss. It doesn't hype up the boss. In fact, I feel like it does the opposite. If anything, I think I'd place a marauder here or something, some kind of enemy that would train the player to get used to the green flash weak point mechanic, or something that would encourage the player to use the hammer to extend a counter window like an armored baron. But stone imps do neither of those things, and they're not even encouraging you to use the hammer to kill these imps because they litter the area with shotgun ammo for you to use instead. And speaking of the final boss, I don't like it either, for a lot of reasons, and I assume most everyone has already talked about why this boss isn't that great, and I don't really care, to be honest. Like I said at the very start, I don't think bosses have ever been Doom's strong suit, and while I do think Doom Eternal's other bosses are excellent, I could really care less if the game has one weak boss fight. As long as the encounters and the maps are good, that's all I care about. But I don't think they are. I didn't have fun with Tag 2. I didn't have fun with it on the first playthrough. Or in the brief moments that I did have fun, then those little moments of fun are vastly outshadowed by the overuse of white belt encounters or encounters that don't require you to participate in the Doom dance that I love this game so much for in the first place. I'm sorry to say, but I think this new direction of balancing the pacing for a first playthrough, or balancing for really inexperienced players by lowering the skill floor instead of trying to raise those players up, has simply harmed the experience. And I do not think it was the right move at all. And like I said in the pacing chapter, I'm genuinely really worried when Hugo says that they've gotten really good at pacing, because no matter how good the first playthrough pacing is, it has come at the cost of what makes Doom, Doom in my eyes. Hugo always says that this game isn't fun if you're not being pushed, and you know what? He's right. I'm not being pushed at all here, and I'm certainly not having fun. The Ancient Gods Part 2 is in stark contrast to the rest of the game, and I just don't understand what caused this sudden shift in direction. I am not a fan of the Ancient Gods Part 2, and after this video, I don't think I'm ever going to play through Tag 2 again just for the fun of it. Now, I would have liked to say that at least Tag 1 has stayed consistent, and that I would just go back to that content when I want a true Doom experience, but this brings us to the next unfortunate and depressing topic that I need to cover. I've noticed that id Software seems to have a tendency to over-tweak things when they want to make balance adjustments. And for a game that has so many complex systems that are all deeply connected with one another, I think that kind of balance is very dangerous. I first noticed this over-tweaking thing when the Holt Slayer Gate originally launched in a noticeably easier state compared to the Holt itself. They then updated it, which turned it into possibly the most challenging encounter in the entire game. Personally, I was cool with that because I thought it was awesome that they had enough confidence in the player to handle something so crazy. And generally, I'd rather have buffs any day over nerfs, but my personal feelings aside, that was probably an overtweak. They've since scaled that encounter back just a little bit, and I think it's in a great spot now. Now, before we get into this, Hugo has said that he'll be reverting some of these nerfs. Not all of them, unfortunately, but regardless, I'm going to talk about the nerfs, whether they're going to be reverted or not, because it's very important to understand why these were mistakes so that it doesn't happen again. But now let's take a look at the Arachnotron. He was also changed with the recent DLC update. Hugo hinted at potential Arachnotron nerfs on stream before this happened, and he reassured us that it was just going to be a minor animation change to make his turret easier to shoot, and that high-level players won't notice it. Great, that sounds completely fine. An animation change might mess up our muscle memory for a little bit, but it won't take long at all to adjust, and it would absolutely help less experienced players hit the turret. So awesome, that sounds like a win-win. But instead, it wasn't just his animations that were tweaked, but they also reduced his plasma fire rate and also the spread of his shots. This is already way too much, and I don't think it was necessary at all. Remember when I compared the new and old demons and I said that the Arachnotron's purpose is to keep the player on the move? Yeah, well now his range of effectiveness has been cut in half, which results in Arachnotrons that are placed at long distances being almost useless now, only little more effective than a mecha zombie at the same range. And this double whammy of a balance change directly affects how he functions as a chess piece, which would then mean you would have to tweak each and every encounter that was specifically designed with his old functionality in mind. Except they didn't do that, and in Tag 2 they seemingly were placed with the old functionality in mind, which is just a big balance problem on top of another one. I could also talk about how the turret nerf, while seemingly a positive change on the surface, and rest assured I don't mind it too much, but it does undoubtedly affect how you interact with these chess pieces in larger encounters. Now imagine you're getting shot by turrets all over the place, and there is no time at all to take your focus away from the other demons in the arena to shoot those turrets. You used to be able to strategically shoot just a couple of them once to give you a short window of safety from getting shot, but now if you're in a position where turrets are shooting at you from all over the place, you have lost the ability to instantly stop them from shooting you. Now you have to direct your attention at them for much longer than you used to in order to shoot them twice or stare at them long enough to make them go down, which can be a deadly situation if you're driving the race car at 500 miles per hour. And remember, it was still possible to one-cycle the old turrets if you really needed to. And now the Bloodmaker, which is a bit more complicated to pin down due to how potent these chess pieces really are, so I'm not going to go too deep into it. But the window to shoot their heads has been increased, which seems like a great change on the surface, but this change has also turned encounters like this one in the World Spear into a boring slog for players with good aim and reflexes. My point with all of this is that the butterfly effect is very real. Even the slightest change to how one of these chess pieces function will have a noticeable domino effect on encounters. This brings me back to why I believe giving players a free blood punch upon getting cursed is a bad idea. Sure, this might make Tag 2 a slightly less annoying experience for a certain demographic of players, but I'm thinking long term here. Think of how much potential that chess piece will lose for future encounter designs. Cursed Prowlers, which are an enemy that requires you to get glory kills quickly and navigate in unconventional ways to catch them, and Cacodemons, an enemy that can quickly give you glory kills and are perfect targets to meat hook swing off of, would no longer be a match made in heaven, and at a high level will then turn Cursed Prowlers into nothing more than a brief annoyance or distraction. It lowers their creative potential, I think. Of course, modders will always find a way to work around this and build clever encounters with the new functionality in mind, but it's a lot harder to work with a chess piece that has objectively less functionality and less possibilities than it previously did. Now let's talk about the changes made to Tag 1's encounters. Hugo has said that the changes made to UAC Atlantica were not done because he thought it was too hard, but instead were done to improve the pacing, which I just don't understand. The people who liked Tag 1, I think, were fine with the pacing, and the people who didn't like Tag 1 didn't dislike it just for the pacing. They didn't like it because they had to fight 2 Marauders at the same time, or they didn't like it because they had to fight Spirits, or they just generally didn't like the difficulty. So removing and simplifying encounters isn't going to win over those people who didn't like it in the first place. It's only going to frustrate the players who already liked it as it was. Now, for the sake of argument, let's pretend that these changes were all made to make the tweaked encounters an easier experience. I want to go through and talk about the encounter changes that frustrated me the most and give my own suggestions on how they could have been tweaked to make them a smoother experience without just removing chess pieces or changing the encounters into something that they aren't. Let's start with the Cybermancubi Dread Knight encounter that I talked about in the difficulty chapter. Instead of just removing these chess pieces, which has done nothing but turn this otherwise exciting room into an empty room with a switch, why not instead place some free blood punch charges around to use on the Mancubi? And this encounter that used to have an overdrive power-up has now been changed into a quad damage, which needless to say turns the Tyrant, which is the climax of this encounter, into a complete joke. Now, when Tag 1 was released, the overdrive used to give the Unmaker infinite ammo, which honestly I thought that was intentional as a way to give the Unmaker a slight edge in certain situations, but that was patched out at some point. Instead of using a quad damage that allows the player to delete this chess piece with any weapon, why not patch back in the Unmaker's overdrive functionality? This not only would give the Unmaker a bit more depth, as then it could be a chess piece that works together with another chess piece, but also doesn't completely trivialize the climax of this fight, because you still need to be using a super weapon at the climax if you really wanted to delete this Tyrant. Basically, this allows the player to get rid of the Tyrant quickly and easily if they wanted to, but not trivializing the fight for players who would still like to fight that Tyrant. Now, the tentacles and the blood swamps, I think I've made my points clear about in the chapter about pacing, and also when we talked about evil tricks in Doom. The tentacles were annoying, yes, but they were tricks. They lended to this map's unique identity that helped it stand out among the rest of the maps. The Blood Swamps is not your friend. The Blood Swamps is a map that will spit in your face and call you names, and that's cool. There's a reason why almost everyone loves this map, and I think that playfully antagonistic relationship that it has with the player is exactly the reason why. I think removing the tentacles was a mistake. It makes certain areas feel kinda lifeless, and now things like this armor pickup are just free to take. You may think this is just a minor thing, and yeah, maybe it is, but these changes add up, and I feel like it makes certain parts of the Blood Swamps feel a lot more lifeless than it once was. And I want to talk about this encounter specifically for a second. Tentacles in the fog were removed from this encounter, and honestly I can't say that I miss them, but I do absolutely think that the reasoning for removing those tentacles was mishandled. Hugo said they removed the tentacles in the fog so players wouldn't cheese the fight by getting up to the top. Well, for one, I have to say that I didn't get up to the top because I needed to cheese the encounter. I got up there because it was fun, and it gave me an advantage over the enemies. Removing the tentacles is not going to discourage me from platform getting up there. But you know what would? A pain elemental that only spawns if you set foot on this platform. Or maybe how about you move the tentacles that were in the fog up onto this platform instead. So you're not removing chess pieces, but instead are tweaking their placement. Not only does this actually give this encounter more life instead of removing life, but is also adding an extra little cheeky trick up this map's sleeve, which lends toward the playfully antagonistic relationship that I thought made this map special in the first place. And now the double Baron Spirit encounter. I think Hell Knights as a replacement is not the right way to go about this. Here's how I would have tweaked this one without removing the Barons. You know these two cue balls that actually do a substantial amount of damage to the possessed Barons? And you know how there's currently a high likelihood of the player wasting these cue balls before the Barons spawn in? Yeah, why not double or even triple the amount of cue balls while only spawning them after all of the imps at the start have been killed, so that you're both giving the player a higher chance of hitting the Barons with these things, but also making it a guarantee that the player won't waste them before the Baron comes in. Also, why not help the player understand how to properly counter possessed enemies by tweaking the tutorial message to encourage the player to use lock-on rockets against them and telling them to keep their distance? Oh, and I also have a serious complaint about what has happened to the pacing since this encounter was nerfed. Depending on which path you take, this is the very first time that the music shifts into the heavy combat track. Needless to say, when your first experience with the lead riffs of the song is alongside a really tough fight, it feels fucking awesome. But now, the heavy fight music plays alongside an encounter that you can mindlessly blast your way through with one weapon mod. That's a bigger pacing problem in my opinion. Talking about the tentacles again, and hopefully this is the last time I have to talk about these goddamn things, these tentacles on the Cyber Demon fight weren't just trolly. They became reliable sources of ammo because their placements are always the same. This Cyber Demon is obviously an enemy that's going to eat all of your ammo, and you're going to be chainsawing a few times here, and these zombies can sometimes be in a really bad spot or somewhere that you can't get to without revealing yourself to the Cyber Demon, which can be a very dangerous situation on Ultra Nightmare. So those trolly tentacles had become reliable places that you could refill ammo from. They're no longer there, so now you have to rely on the zombies to restock your supplies just like every single other fight in this game. I actually thought the placement of these tentacles was smart and it helped them stick out as a chess piece, so yeah, I'm kinda sad that Hugo saw it differently. Personally, I would love to see every single change made to Tag 1's encounters reverted, and the balance changes made to the chess pieces, especially the Arachnotron, to at least be reverted when playing on Ultraviolence and Nightmare. I really hope that id will look at balance changes with a little more nuance in the future, and I'm preaching to the choir here, any game developer knows this already, but please understand that every single little tweak and adjustment will have a butterfly effect somewhere else when you're dealing with such a tightly designed game where every system has an impact on every other system. They worked so hard to make sure this game was balanced on launch, but now they're messing with it. And after seeing some of the domino effects that these changes have had when you're pushing the race car to 500 miles per hour, I've honestly become terrified of every future balance change. And speaking of driving the race car at 500 miles per hour, I'll be damned if I let this video end on a sour note. I've thought about everything I wanted to include in this chapter, but there's just so much. I wanted to go over all of my personal requests for the game, like eventually getting master levels for every map with more unique arcadey game modes, or classic mode implemented for the base maps too. I would love to see more quality of life options, to see Ultra Nightmare streamlined in a minor way so that the early game isn't as repetitive as it currently is, and to have the ability to skip minor animations like putting batteries in the hub, or the unskippable Go Here cinematics, which are two things that can get tedious on multiple replays. I would like to see better in-game music mixing so that I don't have to put the sound effects volume down so low just to hear the soundtrack. I would like to see more customization options in general, more HUD colors, more render modes, and more sound effects packs, or the option to change the main menu music back to the old track. I'd like to see more helpful indicators on the race car HUD, like the dash and grenades, and of course I'd like to see all of the known bugs squashed, even if it takes years for them to figure them all out. I originally had a list of new bugs that I've been able to identify, like how rocket head headshots on Bloodmakers no longer gives the pinata drops, or this situation where you can't get a glory kill on a cursed Prowler if you're already cursed. There's really just so much to talk about with this game. Topics that are worthy of a whole video on their own. I haven't even mentioned multiplayer at all. I don't really play battle mode, mostly because the 2v1 format gives me a lot of performance anxiety, so usually I stay away, but if they were to ever add a larger mode, or some kind of deathmatch or co-op mode long into the future, I'd be down for that in a heartbeat. But I am very excited for invasion mode, and I'm still fine with waiting for all of this. I want id to take as much time as they need to make this game perfect. Months, years, a decade, I don't care. We've seen what happens when there are time limits and deadlines to this stuff, and nothing good ever comes from crunch. So I hope the publishers will allow id, and that id will allow themselves as much time as they need to polish Doom and support Doom Eternal for many years down the line. I'm fine with waiting, and I think every other dedicated fan can say the same. Now, I do have a new idea that could be cool, something I don't think I've seen anyone suggest before. Since encounters are really what I like to see from id, and clearly I think the encounters in Tag 2 have suffered in the name of pacing, at some point I would love to see some smaller scale, simpler encounter-based maps that aren't worried about pacing and are fully committed to creating clever and engaging games of combat chess using pieces of maps that already exist. So it doesn't have to be new maps with cutscenes or anything like that, just new layouts using already made assets that are inspired more by classic map and encounter design, including key hunting, booby traps, and evil tricks around every corner. I was thinking something like a basic map that takes place in the environment of the Hell Barge from the first level, or maybe a short map made entirely from the interior gore assets found in the Super Gore Nest, or a map that uses the interior arc building assets. This could be a fun way to give all of their level designers a chance to design and put their own personal touch to encounters and maps on a smaller scale that doesn't have to have months worth of polish before release. And with this, we could get new official encounters that aren't restricted by pacing and also aren't restricted by having to be extremely difficult like in a master level. The level designers could just have freedom to do whatever they want. That sounds like fun to me. But you know what would be even more awesome? To give those hypothetical level design assets, and especially the tools to create new levels and all other kinds of content, directly to the community. Modding is quite possibly the most important thing for any game. I believe that a thriving modding community is the greatest thing any developer could ask for. And yet, we're living in an unfortunate era where devs and/or publishers never acknowledge or actively stop modding from happening, despite every single instance of modding in the past to usually be a positive thing. I mean, think of all the games that we wouldn't have without modding. Think of all the game developers today that wouldn't be in the industry without getting their start from modding other games. I know I wouldn't be working on games if it weren't for Valve releasing their in-house cinematic tools for free. And Doom? Oh man, of course Doom would not be Doom without mods. Modding is just as much a part of Doom's DNA as demons, shotguns, and evil tricks are. In an alternate reality, where mods either were restricted by id or they just never took off, then I'm sure Doom would still be legendary for more contextual, contemporary reasons, but the Doom as we know it today, the thriving franchise in the late 2010s and 2020s, the game that still inspires so much art and media, the game that still gets new maps and polished megawads created constantly, the game that still gets full indie games built off of its base released so long after its initial lifespan, the game with a huge diverse community of dedicated fans, that Doom would not exist without mods. And I hope that modern id, and especially whatever publisher ends up owning id in the future, will continue to understand, respect, and most importantly, work with and assist the modding community for Doom Eternal by releasing official modding tools and continued support. So this game could also become another legendary entry into whatever amalgamation of a series Doom has become over its lifetime. You don't know how happy it's made me to see that Hugo Martin and Marty Stratton are now very open to mods, and I really hope that nothing is going to change their minds away from modding in the future. Even without official modding tools, Doom Eternal has already managed to gather a few incredible and game-changing mods. My desires for brilliantly designed games of combat chess and deliberate evil trickery are all already being fulfilled thanks to community-made master levels and horde mode Trial of the Dark Lord. My desires for endless replay value are already being fulfilled by mods like the original horde mode and the enemy randomizer. Community-made skins are currently filling the void created by some of the more boring official skins, and even if they usually destroy the balance of the game, it's always fun to experiment with mods that tweak the balance of the game to create new experiences like Kaiser tweaks or Zoom Eternal. Thanks to mods, I get to feel what Doom Eternal could feel like with a rocket jump, and I get to have a real classic experience by replacing the Fire Barons with their classic red look, giving the plasma gun the power it once had, and I get to relish in the satisfying aftermath of a large encounter. And I get to give the Sentinel Hammer a much-needed sound improvement. Mods are great, and they will undoubtedly extend this game's lifespan for years and maybe even decades if they're properly supported with official modding tools. And I don't care how long it takes for id to release them, as long as they eventually do. I promise you that it will have a positive impact on the game for the future. I sincerely hope that id will forever support and assist the modding community, and that modders and players will continue to have the passion for tweaking, breaking, and experimenting with this game so that it truly can become